10 Secret Societies, Whispers from the Shadows. In the spaces between what we know and what we feared to discover, there exist organizations that have captured the imagination of humanity for centuries. Groups that meet in the dark, behind closed doors, wearing masks both literal and metaphorical. Secret societies. The very words conjure images of hooded figures gathered around flickering candles, ancient rituals performed in forgotten temples, and powerful men shaping the course of history from positions we cannot see. Tonight we descend into the hidden chambers of 10 such organizations. Some are real, some are myths built on fragments of truth, and some occupy that unsettling space between the two, where reality and legend blur until we can no longer distinguish one from the other. What you're about to hear draws from historical records, declassified documents, journalistic investigations, eyewitness accounts, and the fevered speculation that has grown around these groups like moss on ancient stone. I will not tell you what to believe. I will only show you what others have found, what they claim to have witnessed, and what remains stubbornly hidden from view. Some of these societies were founded with noble intentions, only to be corrupted by the power they accumulated. Others began in darkness and have remained there. A few may never have existed at all, except as convenient targets for our collective paranoia. But all of them share one quality. They make us ask uncomfortable questions about who really holds the levers of power in our world, and whether the democracy we believe in is nothing more than a carefully maintained illusion. The human fascination with secret societies is as old as civilization itself. We are drawn to the forbidden, to knowledge that is kept from us, to rooms we are not allowed to enter. There is something deeply unsettling about the idea that important decisions affecting millions of lives might be made not in the halls of government we can see, but in private meetings we know nothing about. That business leaders, politicians, academics, and royalty might gather away from public scrutiny to discuss matters they will never acknowledge. That rituals older than Christianity might still be practiced by some of the most powerful people on earth. Are these fears justified? Are secret societies really the puppet masters pulling the strings of world events? Or are they nothing more than wealthy men's clubs, places where the elite can relax away from the public eye, engage in harmless traditions, and network with others of their social class? The answer, as with most things that dwell in shadow, is likely more complex than either extreme would suggest. What we do know is that secret societies have existed throughout human history. The ancient mystery cults of Greece and Rome, the medieval guilds with their closely guarded trade secrets, the esoteric orders of the Renaissance, the revolutionary cells that overthrew monarchies, the occult organizations that sought to unlock hidden knowledge through ritual and study. They have been persecuted by churches and governments, hunted as heretics and traitors, or welcomed into the corridors of power as trusted advisors. The societies we'll explore tonight represent a spectrum of human aspiration and corruption. Some sought spiritual enlightenment. Others pursued political power. A few claimed to possess ancient wisdom passed down through the ages, and some, perhaps, were simply elaborate games played by bored aristocrats with too much time and money. But before we enter their hidden sanctums, we must understand something crucial. The line between a legitimate secret society and a conspiracy theory is often razor thin. When an organization refuses to discuss its activities, when its members deny or downplay their involvement, when rituals are performed in absolute privacy, The absence of information creates a vacuum that speculation rushes to fill. And speculation, once it takes root, can grow into something far more elaborate than the truth it replaced. So as we proceed through these 10 societies, remember this: you are hearing multiple versions of reality, competing narratives about what these groups are and what they do. Some of these narratives come from credible historians and journalists. Others come from conspiracy theorists who see patterns where none exist. And a few come from the societies themselves, carefully crafted public relations designed to obscure more than they reveal. The truth, if it exists at all, lies somewhere in the accumulated weight of all these stories, in the places where they align and the silences they share. Now, let us descend into the shadows. 1. Skull and Bones, the tomb on High Street. On the campus of Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, there stands a building unlike any other in that hallowed institution of learning. Built in the Egyptian Revival style, with no windows facing the street, and massive stone walls that seem designed to keep secrets rather than simply house them. This structure is known simply as the tomb. For nearly 2 centuries, it has served as the headquarters of one of America's most notorious secret societies, Skull and Bones. The society was founded in December of 1832 by William Huntington Russell and Alphonso Taft. According to the official story, it emerged from a dispute among Yale's debating societies over that year's Phi Beta Kappa Awards. But from its very beginning, Skull and Bones was something different, something darker than a mere academic fraternity. It was known initially as the Eulogian Club, Greek for a blessing, but it quickly adopted the symbol that would define it, a skull and crossbones positioned above the number 322. That number, 322, has been the subject of endless speculation. Some say it refers to the year 322 BC, when the Greek orator Demosthenes died, marking the fall of Athenian democracy. Others claim it points to a German predecessor society, a secret order from which Russell brought the traditions of Skull and Bones. A third theory suggests it refers to Freemasonic Lodge number 322 in Suffolk, England, signaling an unspoken fraternal connection between the two organizations. The society has never confirmed any of these interpretations, preferring to let the mystery deepen with each passing year. What we do know about Skull and Bones comes from leaked documents, accounts from former members who broke their oaths of secrecy, and journalists who have managed to piece together fragments of information over the decades. The society selects exactly 15 members from Yale's junior class each year during a ritual known as Tap Day or Tap Night. These 15 are chosen for their leadership potential, their academic achievement, or simply because they come from the right families, families whose names have appeared on Skull and Bones membership rolls for generations. The selection process is deliberately theatrical. Senior members of Bones literally tap chosen juniors on the shoulder, usually at midnight, and utter the phrase, "Go to your room." The topped student then must wait in their dormitory for further instructions. Those who accept the invitation are sworn to absolute secrecy about everything that will follow. Those who decline, though it happens rarely, are said to face subtle but unmistakable social consequences at Yale. Once a bonesman, always a bonesman. That is the society's operating principle. The 15 members of each class, known as a club, meet twice weekly during their senior year in the tomb, where they undergo rituals and initiation rites that have remained remarkably consistent since the society's founding. These rituals, based on leaked information and accounts from a few members who later spoke out, are designed to forge bonds that will last a lifetime. New initiates, according to these accounts, are required to lie in a coffin and recount their entire sexual history to the assembled group. This confession is said to create a sense of vulnerability and shared intimacy, binding the members through mutual knowledge of each other's deepest secrets. Other rituals involve taking on nicknames within the society. The tallest member becomes Long Devil. The member who captains the Yale football team is called Boaz. The member with the most sexual experience is designated Magog, while the least experienced is Gog. Former President George H.W. Bush was reportedly called Magog during his time in Bones. Think about that for a moment. A man who would go on to head the Central Intelligence Agency and lead the United States was once required to detail his sexual exploits to 14 other young men in a windowless tomb while participating in rituals that sound more appropriate to a medieval mystery cult than a modern university. But it gets stranger. The tomb itself is said to contain relics that the society has, to put it delicately, acquired over the years. Members reportedly call this practice crooking, and they take pride in outdoing previous generations' exploits. Among the alleged trophies housed within those stone walls are the skulls of Martin Van Buren, the 8th President of the United States, Pancho Villa, the Mexican revolutionary, and most controversially, Geronimo, the legendary Apache leader. The story of Geronimo's skull is particularly disturbing. In 1918, according to claims that have never been definitively proven or disproven, Prescott Bush, father of George H.W. Bush and grandfather of George W. Bush, allegedly participated in the grave robbery of Geronimo's remains. Bush was serving in the Army at the time and was stationed near Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where Geronimo was buried. Along with several fellow officers who were also bonesmen, Bush is said to have exhumed the warrior's skull and 2 bones, bringing them back to the tomb as a trophy. In 2009, descendants of Geronimo sued Skull and Bones, demanding the return of these remains. The lawsuit was dismissed, and the society never confirmed or denied possessing them. But the very fact that such a lawsuit could be filed, that it was taken seriously enough to go to court, tells us something about the society's reputation. People believe Skull and Bones capable of such acts, and in the absence of transparency, belief becomes its own form of truth. The Society's membership roster reads like a catalog of American power. 3 United States presidents have been bonesmen: William Howard Taft, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush. During the 2004 presidential election, both major party candidates were members of Skull and Bones. George W. Bush and John Kerry, running against each other for the most powerful position in the world, had both participated in the same secret rituals, had both lain in the same coffin, had both sworn oaths to the same organization.
When journalists asked them about this during the campaign, their responses were telling. Kerry said simply, "Not much, because it's a secret." Bush, in his autobiography, wrote that Skull and Bones was so secret I can't say anything more. Here were 2 men asking the American people to trust them with the presidency, and both refused to discuss an organization they had belonged to for decades. The cognitive dissonance is striking. Beyond presidents, Skull and Bones has produced an extraordinary number of CIA officials, including multiple directors of the agency. Supreme Court justices have been members. Captains of industry, media moguls, and political advisors have emerged from those Thursday night meetings in the tomb. The Society's business arm, the Russell Trust Association, manages significant financial assets and owns property that includes Deer Island, a 40-acre retreat on the St. Lawrence River, where bonesmen gather to rekindle old friendships, away from public scrutiny. Critics argue that Skull and Bones represents everything wrong with American society: inherited privilege, old boy networks, the perpetuation of elite power structures across generations. The society selected its first African-American member in 1965. It didn't admit women until 1992, more than a century and a half after its founding. For most of its history, it was an institution by, for, and about white Protestant men from wealthy families. Defenders of Bones argue that the conspiracy theories surrounding it are overblown, that it's simply a fraternity where future leaders bond and network, no different in kind from dozens of other organizations at elite universities. They point out that many members have gone on to unremarkable careers, that not every bonesman becomes a president or CIA director, that the rituals, while admittedly strange, are harmless theater. But the society's obsessive secrecy undermines this defense. If Skull and Bones is truly just a harmless fraternity, why the absolute prohibition on discussing it? Why do members, even decades after leaving Yale, refuse to answer basic questions about the organization? Why are the rituals performed behind walls thick enough to withstand siege? Why does the tomb have no windows facing the street? The architectural design of the tomb itself speaks volumes. Built in the 1850s, it was deliberately constructed to be imposing and mysterious. Inside, according to those few who have described it, is a sanctum sanctorum called 322, reached by ascending a flight of stairs. The interior is decorated in German Baroque style, with skulls and bones as recurring motifs. There are supposedly portraits of past members, artifacts from various civilizations, and that coffin used in initiation rituals. In 2001, a journalist named Alexandra Robbins published Secrets of the Tomb, a book based on extensive research and interviews with former members. Robbins described rituals involving robes, devil costumes, and psychological manipulation designed to make members feel simultaneously privileged and obligated. She painted a picture of an organization that uses initiation trauma and shared secret knowledge to create lifelong bonds of loyalty. The society's influence on American power structures is difficult to quantify, but impossible to dismiss. When members of the same secret organization occupy positions in government, intelligence, finance, and media, the potential for coordination, for unspoken agreements, for decisions made based on old loyalties rather than public good becomes very real. This is not to say such coordination necessarily occurs, but the possibility, the structure that would enable it, exists. Consider what happened after George W. Bush became president. Multiple bonesmen received key appointments in his administration. Was this nepotism, cronyism, or simply a president surrounding himself with trusted individuals who happened to share his Skull and Bones background? The distinction matters, but from the outside, in the absence of transparency, all three look the same. Skull and Bones embodies a fundamental tension in American society. We claim to be a meritocracy, a nation where anyone can rise through talent and hard work, but organizations like Bones suggest a different reality, that power is inherited, that your success depends not on what you know, but who you know, that secret handshakes and shared rituals matter more than public qualifications. And yet the society endures. New classes of 15 are tapped every year. The rituals continue behind those stone walls. Whatever Skull and Bones is, whatever it does, it has survived nearly 200 years of suspicion, investigation, and criticism. That resilience itself suggests something significant about the organization and its hold on the American establishment. The tomb on High Street still stands, still guards its secrets, and every Thursday night, the lights inside still burn, as a new generation of bonesmen gather to participate in rituals they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. Rituals they will never discuss, obligations they will never acknowledge. What happens inside remains, as it has always been, hidden from the world.
But this very freedom is what concerns critics. When leaders gather in complete privacy,
when they're specifically told that business dealings are forbidden, but nothing prevents them from discussing the issues of the day, when they form friendships and bonds away from public scrutiny. What impact does this have on decisions made later in the official world? Can a Supreme Court justice who spent a weekend at Bohemian Grove really rule impartially on a case involving a CEO he got drunk with under the redwoods? Can a president truly represent the interests of average Americans after 2 weeks at an exclusive retreat where membership costs tens of thousands of dollars and guests must be invited by existing members? The Grove is divided into camps, more than 100 of them scattered through the property. Each camp has its own character, its own traditions, its own membership. Some camps are more prestigious than others. Caveman Camp, Mandalay Camp, and Hillbillies Camp are among the most exclusive. Getting invited to the right camp, being accepted by the right group within the Grove, is a mark of status even among the already elite. This stratification within stratification, this hierarchy among the powerful, reveals something about human nature that secret societies often demonstrate. It's not enough to be rich and powerful. You must be more rich, more powerful, more elite than others who are themselves rich and powerful. The Grove provides a space for these men to establish and maintain their pecking order, away from the eyes of those they govern. The location itself, deep in the redwood forest of Northern California, contributes to the Grove's mystique. These trees are among the oldest living things on Earth, some of them standing for over 1,000 years. To gather beneath them, to perform rituals in their shadow, connects these men to something ancient, something that predates nations and corporations and modern civilization. There's a deliberate choice being made here to hold these gatherings not in a modern facility, but in a primeval forest. Security at Bohemian Grove during the encampment is extraordinary. The property is protected year-round, but during July, the measures intensified dramatically. Local police assist. California Highway Patrol helps secure the roads. If the guest list includes the sitting president, Secret Service becomes involved. Motion detectors, thermal cameras, and armed guards ensure that no unauthorized person enters the property. Despite these measures, a few infiltrators besides Alex Jones have managed to get in over the years. In 1989, writer Philip Weiss posed as a guest for 7 days. His account, published in Spy magazine, described the Grove as a mix of pompous ceremony and juvenile behavior, where senators give speeches in the afternoon and urinate on trees in the evening, where corporate CEOs perform in drag for comedic plays. Weiss's account, like others who have observed the Grove, struggles with a central ambiguity. Is this dangerous or merely ridiculous? Are these men actually coordinating to control world events, or are they just engaging in elaborate cosplay, reliving their fraternity days with more money and better accommodations? The truth is, as usual, might be somewhere in between. What can be documented is that significant political and business discussions have occurred at Bohemian Grove. The Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, was reportedly discussed there in 1942. Nixon famously said that he and Reagan agreed at the Grove in 1967 about not running against each other for the Republican nomination. These are not conspiracy theories, these are acknowledged facts. So while the official rule is no business, the reality seems to be that when you gather hundreds of the most powerful men in America in an isolated location for 2 weeks, business gets discussed, ideas are exchanged, alliances are formed, future collaborations are agreed upon, even if they're never formally arranged. The Grove provides the perfect environment for this, relaxed, private, away from record-keeping and oversight. The club has admitted women as honorary members exactly 4 times in its history, a nonsense 1928. This all-male tradition is vigorously defended by the club, which has fought lawsuits attempting to force it to integrate. The argument is that men need spaces where they can be themselves, away from the civilizing influence of women, away from the need to perform respectability. But this exclusion of women from a gathering of such powerful men is not without consequences. When decisions that affect everyone are discussed in spaces where only men are present, when networks that determine who gets promoted, who gets funding, who gets political support,
are formed in male-only environments, it perpetuates the exclusion of women from power in society at large. The patron saint of Bohemian Grove is John of Nepomuk, a 14th century priest who, according to legend, was martyred for refusing to reveal the confession secrets of the Queen to her husband, the King. A wooden carving of St. John stands at the shore of the lake in the grove, his finger pressed to his lips in a gesture of silence. This is the symbol that encapsulates everything about Bohemian Grove: secrecy as virtue, silence as sacred duty. Protesters gather near the grove almost every year during the encampment, demonstrating against the exclusivity, the secrecy, the concentration of power. The club dismisses them as misguided, insisting that the grove is simply a place where friends gather, where men can escape the pressures of their public lives, where harmless traditions are maintained. And perhaps it is. Perhaps the cremation of care is just theatre. Perhaps the 2 weeks in the grove amount to nothing more than networking and entertainment. Perhaps the conspiracy theories have grown out of proportion to reality, fed by the very secrecy that the club insists upon. But when the most powerful men in the world refuse to discuss what they do for 2 weeks every July, when they gather in secret to perform rituals around a giant owl, when they exclude half of humanity from their proceedings, and then return to make decisions that affect us all, can they really blame people for asking uncomfortable questions? The redwoods continue to stand. The owl continues to gaze down with blank concrete eyes. And every July, the powerful gather in the shadows beneath those ancient trees, burning effigies and making connections that will shape the world beyond the grove's guarded gates. Weaving spiders come not here. Don't work, don't worry, don't conduct business. Just enjoy the rituals and the revelry. But in the spaces between the official denials and the conspiracy theories, in the silence enforced by men with their fingers pressed to their lips, something significant is happening. We just can't see it. And that, perhaps, is exactly the point.
The Knights Templar, warrior monks and lost treasures. In 1095, Pope Urban II stood before a crowd at Clermont, France, and called for a crusade. The Holy Land, he proclaimed, had been under Muslim control for 450 years. It was time for Christian warriors to reclaim Jerusalem for Christendom. This call would unleash centuries of warfare, reshape the map of Europe and the Middle East, and give birth to one of history's most enduring secret societies, the Knights Templar. The Templars were founded officially in 1119 by Hugues de Payens, a French knight, along with 8 companions. Their original stated purpose was simple and noble: to protect Christian pilgrims making the dangerous journey to the Holy Land. After the First Crusade successfully captured Jerusalem in 1099, pilgrims began flooding into the region, and many of them were attacked, robbed or killed by bandits operating in the territories between the Mediterranean coast and the Holy City. These 9 knights established themselves in the ruins of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, specifically in what had been the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built on the site of Solomon's ancient temple. From this location, they took their name: the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the Knights Templar. The word poor in their title is revealing and deeply ironic, given what the order would become. The Templars took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience like any monastic order. They were warrior monks, a novel concept that merged the violence of knighthood with the piety of monasticism. Their seal famously depicted 2 knights riding a single horse, supposedly representing their initial poverty, unable to afford individual mounts. But the Templars would not remain poor for long. Their patron was Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential churchmen of the medieval period. Bernard wrote extensively promoting the Templars, casting them as the ideal Christian warriors, equally devoted to God and to martial prowess. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes,
Pope Honorius II officially recognized the order and granted them papal sanction. They were now an army of God, answerable only to the Pope himself. This direct relationship with the papacy gave the Templars extraordinary independence. They didn't answer to local bishops or kings. They were not subject to local laws or taxation. And as their reputation for military effectiveness grew, so did the flow of donations from European nobility eager to support the crusading cause. Land, money, castles, entire estates were gifted to the order. Within a few decades, the Templars had established a network of fortified preceptories across Europe and the Middle East. They became one of the most formidable military forces in the Crusades, feared for their combat skills and their refusal to retreat or surrender. Templar Knights took an oath to never retreat unless outnumbered 3-1, and even then, only with permission from their commander. This discipline made them invaluable assets in the perpetual warfare of the Crusades. But it was their financial innovations that would transform the Templars from holy warriors into something much more significant: the first international bankers. The problem they solved was straightforward. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land needed to carry large amounts of money for the journey, making them targets for theft. The Templars created a system where a pilgrim could deposit funds at a Templar preceptory in Europe, receive a letter of credit, encrypted with ciphers, and then withdraw the equivalent amount at a Templar facility in the Holy Land. This was revolutionary. It was essentially the invention of banking as we know it, with letters of credit, encrypted financial documents, and international transactions. The Templars charged fees for these services, and the fees added up. Nobility began using the Templars not just for pilgrimage finances, but for all their banking needs. The order that had started with 9 knights sharing horses was now handling the financial affairs of kings. By the 13th century, the Templars owned thousands of properties across Europe. They had their own fleet of ships. They loaned money to monarchs and held the treasuries of several kingdoms. And they did all of this while maintaining their status as a religious order, exempt from taxation and answerable only to the Pope. They were perhaps the wealthiest and most powerful non-governmental organization in the medieval world. But great wealth and power inevitably attract envy and suspicion. The Templars maintained strict secrecy about their internal affairs. Their initiation ceremonies were conducted in private. Their chapter meetings were closed. This secrecy, combined with their wealth and independence, led to rumors. What were they doing behind closed doors? What rituals were they performing? What knowledge had they acquired? The mystery deepens when we consider what the Templars may have found during their time in Jerusalem. They were based in the ruins of Solomon's temple for decades. According to legend, and it must be stressed this is legend rather than documented history, the Templars conducted extensive excavations beneath the Temple Mount. What were they searching for? The most popular theory is that they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest that, according to the Hebrew Bible, contained the original tablets of the Ten Commandments. The Ark had disappeared from historical records centuries earlier, and tradition held that it might be hidden somewhere in the complex of tunnels and chambers beneath the Temple Mount. Other legends claim the Templars found the Holy Grail, though what the Grail actually was remains subject to debate. Was it the cup Christ drank from at the Last Supper, the cup that caught his blood at the crucifixion? Or was Holy Grail a code name for something else entirely? Knowledge, perhaps, or documents that would upend Christian orthodoxy? A more recent and more controversial theory, popularized by conspiracy theorists, suggests that the Templars found genealogical records proving that Jesus Christ had been married to Mary Magdalene and that they had children, creating a bloodline that survived into the medieval period. This theory is not taken seriously by academic historians, but it has captured popular imagination. particularly after being featured in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. What we do know from sources that are not legend is that the Templars possessed significant knowledge of architecture and engineering. They built or helped build many of the great Gothic cathedrals of Europe. These buildings were architectural marvels for their time, incorporating innovations in structure and design that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. How much of this knowledge came from their time in the Holy Land, studying the architectural achievements of Roman and Byzantine builders, remains unclear.
The Templars also maintained extensive diplomatic and trade relationships with Muslim powers. This was necessary for their operations in the Holy Land, but it also led to accusations of heresy. Were these warrior monks becoming too friendly with the enemies of Christendom? Were they learning things they shouldn't from Islamic scholars and mystics? The beginning of the end came in 1287, when the Muslim general Salah ad-Din, known to Europeans as Saladin, decisively defeated the Crusader forces at the Battle of Hattin. Within months, Jerusalem fell back under Muslim control. The Crusader states began collapsing. The Templars retreated to Cyprus, then to Europe, but their primary purpose, protecting pilgrims in the Holy Land, was becoming irrelevant. Without an active crusade to justify their existence and their privileges, the Templars became increasingly vulnerable. They were immensely wealthy, operated with independence that kings resented, and were surrounded by rumors of heresy and secret practices. They had become a liability rather than an asset. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, had personal reasons to target the Templars. He owed them significant debts. His kingdom was financially strained, and the Templars' Paris temple served as a fortress within his capital where enormous wealth was stored, wealth he couldn't access. The solution, from his perspective, was elegant. Destroy the order, seize its assets, and eliminate his debts in one coordinated action. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, Philip struck. In a coordinated operation across France, hundreds of Templars were arrested simultaneously on charges of heresy, devil worship, sodomy, and various other offenses designed to shock Christian society. The mass arrest on a Friday the 13th is sometimes cited as the origin of the superstition about that date being unlucky. The charges brought against the Templars were extraordinary. They were accused of denying Christ, spitting on the cross during their secret initiation ceremonies, worshiping an idol called Baphomet, described variously as a head, a goat-headed figure, or a demon. They were accused of ritualized homosexuality and of various magical practices. These accusations, it must be noted, were standard charges brought against heretics in medieval Europe. The same accusations had been leveled against Cathars, against Jews, against any group the Church wanted to suppress. The Templars were tortured until they confessed. Under torture, people will confess to anything. Some admitted to the charges, providing details that their torturers wanted to hear. Others refused and were executed. The Grand Master of the order, Jacques de Molay, initially confessed under torture, but later recanted. For this, he was slowly burned to death in 1314, alongside another Templar leader, on an island in the Seine River in Paris. According to legend, as the flames consumed him, Jacques de Molay called upon God to summon both King Philip and Pope Clement V to appear before divine judgment within a year. Pope Clement died 1 month later. King Philip died in a hunting accident 7 months after that. This coincidence ensured that the curse of Jacques de Molay would become part of Templar legend. But what happened to the Templars' legendary treasure? When Philip's forces raided Templar properties, they found far less wealth than expected. The Templars had clearly been warned, though whether by sympathizers in Philip's court or by their own intelligence network remains unknown. Ships belonging to the Templars' fleet vanished from the port of La Rochelle shortly before the arrests. Where did they go? What did they carry? One theory holds that Templar treasure was moved to Scotland, which was excommunicated at the time and thus beyond papal authority. Scotland's king, Robert the Bruce, was fighting for independence from England and would have welcomed experienced military commanders with significant resources. Some researchers claimed that Templars fought in the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, helping secure Scottish independence. Scotland's Roslin Chapel, built in the mid-15th century by William Sinclair, a Scottish nobleman, has become a focal point for Templar treasure theories. The chapel is covered in intricate carvings, including some that appeared to depict corn from the Americas, carved decades before Columbus's voyage. Some believe the chapel was built over or near a Templar treasure vault. Others think it contains coded messages, pointing to where the treasure was ultimately hidden. Another theory suggests that Templars fled to Portugal, where the order was reconstituted under a new name, the Order of Christ. This order would later sponsor Portuguese exploration, including the voyages of Vasco da Gama and Prince Henry the Navigator. The ships that explored the African coast and eventually reached India flew sails marked with the Templar cross. Was this simply the Portuguese adopting a traditional symbol, or was it evidence of continuity between the Templars and their Portuguese successors? A third theory, particularly popular among conspiracy theorists, claims the Templars sailed to North America, carrying their treasure to Nova Scotia or even further inland. They supposedly built hidden vaults and left markers that have been discovered over the centuries. The Oak Island mystery in Nova Scotia, involving a supposed treasure vault that has resisted all attempts at excavation, is sometimes linked to the Templars, though evidence for this is speculative at best. What seems clear is that the suppression of the Templars was not total. While the order was officially dissolved by Pope Clement V in 1312, many Templars in countries outside France were allowed to join other military orders or retire to monasteries. The Templars' organizational knowledge, their rituals, and their traditions did not simply vanish. They went underground or were absorbed into other groups.
This is where the connection between the Templars and modern Freemasonry enters the picture. Many Masonic rites, particularly the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, include degrees and ceremonies that claim direct descent from the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar degree in Freemasonry is one of its highest honors, requiring the candidate to affirm Christian faith, an unusual requirement in Freemasonry, which typically welcomes believers of all monotheistic religions. Is this connection historical or merely symbolic? Did actual Templars pass their traditions to medieval stonemasons, eventually evolving into modern Freemasonry? Or did 18th century Freemasons, looking to add historical legitimacy and mystique to their organizations, simply appropriate Templar imagery and legends? Academic historians generally reject the direct historical connection, noting that there is a 400-year gap between the suppression of the Templars and the emergence of organized Freemasonry in the early 18th century. But the legend persists, and some Masonic traditions insist that the connection is real, maintained through secretive chains of initiation that left no documentary record. The Templars' architectural legacy is undeniable. The round churches they built, modeled on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, still stand across Europe. The Temple Church in London, headquarters of the English Templars, survived to become a working church and a tourist attraction. Walking into these round churches, with their circular naves so different from traditional cruciform Christian architecture, one enters spaces designed by minds that had seen and studied the religious architecture of the Holy Land. The symbol of the Templars, the red cross on a white background, has been adopted by numerous organizations over the centuries. It appears in the flags of several nations, it's used by humanitarian organizations, and it continues to be worn by groups claiming Templar descent or inspiration,
some legitimate historical organizations, others conspiracy theory movements or outright hate groups inappropriately appropriating Templar symbolism. Modern Templar orders exist, though none have direct institutional continuity with the medieval order. Some are Masonic bodies, some are Catholic organizations approved by the Vatican, some are historical reenactment societies, and some are, to be blunt, fantasists playing at being knights. The genuine historical research into the Templars has been obscured by centuries of legend, speculation, and outright fabrication. What can we say with confidence about the Knights Templar? They were real, they were powerful. They combined religious devotion with military discipline and financial innovation in ways that made them one of the most significant organizations of the medieval period. They kept secrets, as any organization with their wealth and independence would do. They likely did possess knowledge, whether architectural, diplomatic, or financial, that they guarded carefully. Did they find mystical artifacts? Did they possess secret religious knowledge that challenged church orthodoxy? Did they worship Baphomet or engage in the heretical practices they were accused of? The evidence suggests that the charges brought against them were largely fabricated to justify their destruction. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and the Templars' insistence on secrecy means that we cannot know with absolute certainty what occurred behind the closed doors of their chapter meetings. What we do know is that the Templars, whether by design or by accident, became the template for all secret societies that followed. They demonstrated that an organization could accumulate enormous power by combining religious purpose, military might, financial acumen, and strategic secrecy. They showed that independence from conventional authority structures was possible. And they proved that when such an organization becomes too powerful, too wealthy, too independent, it will eventually face destruction by the established powers it threatens. The treasure of the Templars, whether literal gold or metaphorical knowledge, has never been conclusively found. Perhaps it's buried somewhere, waiting for the right person to decipher the right clue. Perhaps it was spent long ago funding the escape and resettlement of surviving Templars. Perhaps it never existed in the quantities legend suggests. Or perhaps, and this is the most intriguing possibility, the real treasure was never material at all, but knowledge, practices and traditions that were successfully passed down through the centuries, hidden in the rituals of organizations that would come after. The Templars cast a long shadow through history. Every secret society that followed would be compared to them, would be accused of Templar-like conspiracies, would face questions about what they were really doing behind closed doors. The warrior monks, who began as simple protectors of pilgrims, became, in death, far more powerful than they ever were in life, eternal symbols of secret power, hidden knowledge, and mysteries that refuse to be solved.
4. Opus Dei, God's work in the modern world. Among the secret societies we're exploring tonight, Opus Dei occupies a unique position. It is not technically secret. It is a recognized prelature of the Catholic Church, officially approved by multiple popes, with membership that can be publicly acknowledged. And yet it operates with a level of secrecy, influence, and controversy that has earned it a place among the most discussed covert organizations of the modern era. Opus Dei, Latin for Work of God, was founded in 1928 in Madrid, Spain, by José María Escribá de Balaguer, a Catholic priest. Escribá claimed to have received a divine vision on October 2nd of that year, a revelation that inspired him to create an organization dedicated to spreading the message that ordinary life can be a path to holiness. Every person, in every profession, could serve God through their daily work. Not just priests and nuns in monasteries, but businessmen, politicians, laborers, anyone. This sounds innocuous, even admirable. The idea that you don't have to retreat from the world to serve God, that sanctity can be achieved through ordinary life, lived with extraordinary devotion, is hardly controversial. But Opus Dei's methods for achieving this goal, its structure, its influence, and its secrecy, have made it one of the most controversial organizations within the Catholic Church. The organization divides its members into several categories. Numeraries are celibate members who typically live in Opus Dei centers, dedicating their lives fully to the organization while maintaining careers in the secular world. Numerary assistants, almost always women, are celibate members who handle the domestic work in Opus Dei centers, cooking and cleaning. Associates are celibate members who live with their families rather than in centers. Supernumeraries are married members who participate in Opus Dei while raising families. And cooperators are non-members who support Opus Dei's work financially or through other means. This hierarchical structure, with its emphasis on different levels of commitment and different roles for men and women, reflects a deeply conservative vision of Catholic life. Opus Dei is known for its traditional approach to church teaching, its emphasis on personal sin and the need for constant spiritual struggle, and its belief that the modern world has strayed from authentic Catholic values. Numeraries, the celibate members who live in Opus Dei centers, follow practices that have been described by former members as extreme. They engage in corporal mortification, deliberately inflicting physical discomfort or pain as a form of penance and spiritual discipline. This includes wearing the cilice, a small chain with inward-pointing spikes that is strapped around the upper thigh for several hours each day. They practice self-flagellation, whipping themselves with a small rope whip called a discipline. They engage in fasting beyond what the Church requires. They sleep on the floor or on boards instead of mattresses. They take cold showers. Opus Dei defends these practices as voluntary and as part of a long Christian tradition of corporal mortification, pointing to the hair shirts worn by medieval saints, the fasting of desert fathers, the physical penances practiced throughout church history. They note that Pope John Paul II, who was closely aligned with Opus Dei, also practiced self-flagellation. But former members describe these practices differently. They speak of being encouraged to view their bodies as enemies that must be conquered, of being told that physical suffering brings spiritual merit, of a culture where members compete to demonstrate their devotion through increasingly harsh self-punishment. They describe psychological manipulation, where any doubt about Opus Dei's teachings or methods is treated as a spiritual failing, a succumbing to worldly temptation. The organization's recruitment methods have been particularly controversial. Critics, including many former members, describe aggressive targeting of young people, particularly bright students at universities. Opus Dei operates student residences near major universities around the world, offering affordable accommodation and academic support. Students who live in these residences are gradually introduced to Opus Dei's spiritual practices and worldview, often without initially understanding the full extent of what membership entails. Former members describe a process of gradual commitment, where each step seems reasonable in isolation, but together form a progression toward total dedication to the organization. You start by attending a weekly class on Catholic spirituality. Then you're invited to retreats. Then you're asked to meet with a spiritual director, always an Opus Dei priest, who becomes increasingly important in your decision-making. Then you're encouraged to consider a vocation to Opus Dei. And if you say yes, if you commit to becoming a numerary, you're expected to donate your salary to the organization, to live where it directs, to work in whatever career furthers its goals. The comparison to cult recruitment tactics is made frequently by critics, and Opus Dei vehemently rejects this characterization. They point out that members are free to leave, that no one is physically restrained, that membership is voluntary and can be terminated. But former members counter that the psychological bonds created, the sense of spiritual obligation, the belief that leaving Opus Dei means turning away from God, make departure extremely difficult. One of the most troubling aspects of Opus Dei, according to critics, is its practice of encouraging numeraries to minimize or hide their membership. While Opus Dei officially states that membership is not secret, in practice, many members are advised not to advertise their affiliation, particularly in professional settings. This allows Opus Dei members to operate in politics, business, media, and academia without the scrutiny that would come if their allegiance were publicly known. Why does this matter? Because Opus Dei is not just a spiritual organization. It is deeply involved in temporal affairs. It has significant influence in several countries, particularly in Spain, its birthplace, but also in Latin America, the Philippines, and increasingly in Africa and Asia. Members of Opus Dei have held cabinet positions in multiple governments. They influence educational policy, business regulation, and social legislation, always in directions that align with Opus Dei's conservative Catholic worldview.
In Spain, during the Franco dictatorship, Opus Dei members occupied key positions in the government and were instrumental in Spain's economic modernization during the 1960s and 70s. Critics argue that Opus Dei made a devil's bargain, supporting an authoritarian regime in exchange for influence over education and culture. Opus Dei defenders argue that their members brought technocratic competence to government and helped Spain transition from autarky to a modern economy. The organization's financial operations are opaque. Opus Dei claims to have limited central funds, insisting that each regional entity is financially independent. But the lack of transparent accounting makes it impossible to verify this. What is known is that Opus Dei controlled significant real estate, including its headquarters in New York City, a 17-story building on Lexington Avenue that cost $69 million to construct in the early 1990s. The organization operates universities, schools, and conference centers around the world, all requiring substantial resources. Where does the money come from? Much of it comes from donations by members, particularly numeraries who give their entire salaries. Additional funding comes from wealthy cooperators who support Opus Dei's work. But the details of financial flows within the organization remain hidden from public scrutiny, leading to inevitable questions about what is being done with these resources and whether financial interests influence Opus Dei's spiritual guidance. The canonization of Josemaria Escrivá in 2002 was rushed through by Pope John Paul II with extraordinary speed. The normal process for sainthood takes decades, often centuries, and requires rigorous investigation of the candidate's life and virtue. Escrivá was canonized just 27 years after his death, faster than any other saint in modern church history except for recent popes. Critics allege that Opus Dei's influence within the Vatican made this possible, that the organization essentially purchased its founder's sainthood through political pressure and financial resources. The Church's investigation into Escrivá's life was controversial. Allegations emerged that he had a violent temper, that he lived luxuriously while preaching poverty to his members, that he was obsessed with titles and status, eventually claiming to be the Marquis of Peralta through a questionable genealogical connection. These allegations were supposedly addressed during the canonization process, but many church observers felt that inconvenient facts about Escrivá were suppressed or explained away. Opus Dei's relationship with the Vatican hierarchy is complex. It received unprecedented privileges from Pope John Paul II, who elevated it to the status of a personal prelature, making it answerable only to its own prelate and to the Pope, not to local bishops. This structural independence mirrors the position the Knights Templar once held, and it has created similar tensions. Bishops in various countries have expressed frustration at having an organization operating in their dioceses over which they have no authority. Under Pope Benedict XVI, himself theologically conservative, Opus Dei maintained its favored status. But under Pope Francis, the relationship has become strained. Francis, with his emphasis on social justice, care for the poor, and suspicion of clericalism, represents a very different vision of Catholicism than Opus Dei's focus on personal piety and traditional morality. In 2022, Francis reformed the rules governing personal prelatures in ways that could reduce Opus Dei's autonomy, though the practical effects remain to be seen. The organization came to worldwide attention through Dan Brown's novel The Da Vinci Code, which portrayed Opus Dei as a ruthless organization willing to commit murder to protect church secrets. The book was fiction, and Opus Dei rightly objected to being portrayed as a murderous conspiracy. But the controversy revealed something interesting. Even people who dismissed the Da Vinci Code as entertainment fiction tended to believe that there was something sinister about Opus Dei, that Brown's portrayal, while exaggerated, captured something true about the organization's nature. This perception is difficult to shake because Opus Dei operates in a space between transparency and secrecy that invites suspicion. They insist they're not secret, but they discourage members from advertising their affiliation. They claim to be purely spiritual, but they clearly pursue temporal power. They present themselves as simply Orthodox Catholics, but their practices and structures set them apart from mainstream Catholic life. Former members who have spoken out describe an organization that consumes their members' lives entirely. Your Opus Dei spiritual director tells you where to live, what job to take, how to spend your money, whom to befriend, what media to consume. The theory is that this total guidance helps you live every aspect of your life for God. The effect, critics argue, is to surrender your autonomy, to stop thinking for yourself, to become an instrument of the organization's will. The gender dynamics within Opus Dei are particularly troubling to modern observers. Numerary assistants, the women who do domestic work in Opus Dei centers, are almost always from working-class backgrounds, while the numeraries they serve often come from professional families. These women, despite being educated and intelligent, spend their lives cooking and cleaning for others, told that this humble service is their path to sanctity. Meanwhile, male numeraries pursue careers in law, business, politics, and academia. Opus Dei defends this division, arguing that all legitimate work is equally valuable before God, that there's no shame in domestic labor, that these women have chosen their vocation freely. But the question persists. In an organization that prides itself on bringing sanctity to professional life, why are these women not encouraged to sanctify professional life themselves? Why is their calling always to service within the organization rather than engagement with the wider world?
The organization's influence on education is significant and controversial. Opus Dei operates schools and universities around the world, including the University of Navarra in Spain, one of the country's premier institutions. These schools are known for academic excellence, but also for a particular ideological approach. They promote traditional family values, oppose abortion and same-sex marriage, and present a vision of Catholicism that emphasizes personal morality over social justice. Students at Opus Dei institutions often come from wealthy families, creating networks of elite Catholics who carry Opus Dei's influence into business and politics. The organization's critics see this as a deliberate strategy to embed Opus Dei's worldview in the upper classes, ensuring that its interpretation of Catholicism shapes policy even in secular democracies. But perhaps the most significant question about Opus Dei is this: what is its ultimate goal? What does it want? The official answer is simple: to help people become saints through their ordinary work. But the structure, the secrecy,
the cultivation of influence, the concentration of resources, all suggest something more ambitious. Is Opus Dei trying to reshape the Catholic Church in its conservative image? Is it working to influence political systems toward Catholic social teaching as it understands it? Is it simply trying to survive and grow like any institution? The answer likely combines all these elements. Opus Dei is simultaneously a spiritual organization, a political force, a business empire, and a social network. It attracts sincere people seeking a deeper Catholic faith, and it attracts ambitious people seeking connections and advancement. It promotes genuine spirituality, and it engages in the kind of institutional self-preservation and expansion that characterizes all powerful organizations. What we can say with certainty is that Opus Dei wields influence disproportionate to its size. With perhaps 90,000 members worldwide, it is tiny compared to the Catholic Church's billion-plus adherents. But those 90,000 include judges, senators, cabinet ministers, university presidents, corporate executives, and media owners. They are positioned in places where individual influence can have outsized effects. And that influence is exercised quietly, without fanfare, often without public knowledge of the members' affiliation. This is what makes Opus Dei function like a secret society, even while technically being transparent. When people making important decisions are guided by spiritual directors they never mention, when their fundamental worldview is shaped by an organization most people know nothing about, when allegiances exist that are never publicly acknowledged, the practical effect is the same as if the organization were truly secret. Opus Dei represents a distinctly modern form of secret society, hidden in plain sight, operating within legitimate institutions, wielding influence through networks rather than ceremonies, pursuing power while claiming to seek only holiness. Whether you view it as a sincere attempt to bring Catholic spirituality into modern life or as a manipulative cult depends largely on whether you're inside the organization or outside it, whether you accept its self-understanding or trust the accounts of those who have left. What remains beyond dispute is that Opus Dei has mastered the art of influence without visibility, of shaping outcomes while avoiding scrutiny. In that mastery, it fulfills the function of a secret society perfectly, whether it admits to the label or not.
5. Bilderberg Group, the Meeting of Minds. In May of 1954, a group of approximately 100 men gathered at the Hotel de Bilderberg in Oosterbeek, Netherlands. They came from Western Europe and North America, and they represented the elite of politics, business, finance, media, and academia. The meeting was organized by two men, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and Polish politician Joseph Ratzinger. Their stated purpose was to foster dialogue between Europe and America at a time when the Cold War was intensifying and cooperation between Western allies was essential. From that first meeting came an institution that has convened almost every year since, bringing together roughly 150 of the world's most powerful individuals for 3 days of off-the-record discussions. This is the Bilderberg Group, named after that first hotel, and it may be the most influential secret meeting that almost nobody knows is happening. The official story of Bilderberg's founding is straightforward. After World War II, Ratzinger, who had spent the war years organizing resistance movements and promoting European unity, became concerned about growing anti-American sentiment in Europe and isolationist tendencies in America. He believed that if Western leaders could meet informally, away from press coverage and public posturing, they could build relationships and understanding that would strengthen the Atlantic Alliance against Soviet communism. Prince Bernhard, consort to Queen Juliana of the Netherlands and a well-connected figure in European elite circles, had the resources and connections to make such meetings possible. Bernhard's own background was complicated. He had been a member of both the Nazi Party and the SS before marrying into Dutch royalty in 1937. Affiliations he later claimed were purely opportunistic necessities for a German aristocrat in the 1930s. By the war's end, he had positioned himself firmly with the Allies and become a respected figure in Dutch society. The first Bilderberg meeting included representatives from 11 Western European countries and the United States. Among the attendees were the Prime Minister of Belgium, the director of the CIA, executives from major corporations, influential journalists, and academic experts on international relations. The discussions covered transatlantic cooperation, communist threats, and economic integration. From the beginning, Bilderberg established rules that have governed it ever since. Meetings are private. No official minutes are kept, though unofficial notes circulate among participants. Chatham House rule applies. Participants can discuss what was said at the meeting, but cannot attribute statements to specific individuals. This allows for frank discussion, without the fear that offhand comments will become tomorrow's headlines. No resolutions are passed, no votes are taken. Bilderberg is explicitly not a decision-making body. It is, according to its defenders, simply a forum for discussion, a place where leaders can float ideas, test arguments, and engage with perspectives they might not encounter in their usual circles. The informal nature, they argue, is what makes it valuable. Without cameras and reporters, without the need to maintain public positions, people can speak honestly and change their minds when confronted with compelling arguments. Critics see something more sinister. They see the most powerful people in the Western world meeting in secret, refusing to disclose details of their discussions, making connections and forming consensus that will later influence policy in ways the public never knows about. They see, in other words, a shadow government, or at least a shadow advisory council, shaping the direction of Western civilization without democratic accountability. The participant list for each year's meeting, eventually made public though initially kept secret, reads like a who's who of global power. Prime ministers and presidents have attended, central bank governors, CEOs of the largest corporations and financial institutions, top military commanders and intelligence chiefs, media executives from major newspapers and television networks, technology company founders and investors. Henry Kissinger has been a regular since the 1950s. David Rockefeller attended for decades. Margaret Thatcher went before becoming Prime Minister. Bill Clinton attended in 1991, 3 years before being elected president. Tony Blair attended in 1993, 4 years before becoming Prime Minister. Emmanuel Macron attended in 2014, 2 years before becoming French president. The pattern is consistent. Bilderberg often sees future leaders before they reach the top.
This pattern fuels conspiracy theories that Bilderberg doesn't just discuss policy, but actually selects who will be promoted to leadership positions. Did Clinton and Blair and Macron attend Bilderberg meetings as ambitious young politicians, or were they summoned for vetting by the real powers that be, examined to ensure they would be acceptable candidates for leadership? The fact that so many attendees later rose to high office suggests, at minimum, that Bilderberg is very good at identifying rising stars. Whether it also helps elevate them remains an open question. The location of Bilderberg meetings rotates, usually alternating between Europe and North America, though with a preference for Europe. The venues are always luxury hotels or resorts, places that can accommodate all participants in secured comfort.
The host country provides security, often extensive security, with police cordoning off areas around the meeting site and monitoring anyone who tries to approach. This security has become more visible in recent years as protesters and independent journalists have begun gathering outside Bilderberg meetings. These protesters believe they are confronting concentrated power, demanding transparency from people who shape their lives without consent. The security forces keeping them at a distance represent the barrier between the elite and everyone else, the physical manifestation of the separation between those inside the meetings and the billions affected by their decisions. The agenda for each meeting is prepared in advance by a steering committee, a smaller group that meets regularly throughout the year. This committee, currently chaired by a rotating group of senior participants, decides topics, selects attendees, and manages the group's minimal public presence. In recent years, Bilderberg has created a basic website listing participants and agenda topics, and nod to growing demands for transparency. But these agenda items are vague. Artificial intelligence, US elections, China, tell us little about what specifically was discussed or what conclusions were reached. The lack of formal organizational structure is sometimes presented as evidence that Bilderberg is harmless. It has no headquarters, no permanent staff beyond a small administrative office, no budget beyond what is needed to organize the annual meeting. Participants pay their own travel expenses. There's no membership list, just attendees.
What we know about actual discussions at Bilderberg comes from leaks from participants who spoke indirectly about what transpired, and from occasional journalists who managed to infiltrate meetings. In 1957, a reporter named Robert Eringer was smuggled into a Bilderberg meeting and reported hearing discussions about manipulating oil prices and managing third world debt. His account was dismissed as unreliable, but some of the policies he described were later implemented. In the 1970s, investigative journalist Jim Tucker began following Bilderberg meetings, trying to determine who attended and what was discussed. Tucker claimed that Bilderberg had decided on key economic policies before they were publicly announced, that attendees coordinated responses to global crises, that the meetings served to ensure that leaders across multiple countries were working from the same playbook. His work was published in fringe publications and dismissed by mainstream media, but Tucker gathered enough specific information over the years to demonstrate that he had genuine inside sources. More recently, WikiLeaks has published documents touching on Bilderberg, including correspondence suggesting that certain journalists attending the meetings were expected to avoid critical coverage of attendees. This raises uncomfortable questions about media independence. If senior editors and publishers attend Bilderberg meetings alongside the political and business leaders they're supposed to hold accountable, how objective can their coverage be? The composition of Bilderberg is itself revealing. It is overwhelmingly white, male, and drawn from the upper classes of Western society. Women attend, but in small numbers. Non-Western participants are increasingly included, but they're usually educated in Western institutions and aligned with Western economic interests. The working class is absent. Labor union leaders don't attend. Environmental activists aren't invited. Indigenous peoples have no representation. Bilderberg represents a particular class perspective, a particular vision of how the world should be organized. That vision is broadly globalist, favoring free trade, international institutions, reduced national sovereignty in favor of transnational cooperation. These positions are not secret. They're openly advocated by most Bilderberg participants in their public roles. What Bilderberg provides is a space to coordinate how to advance these positions, to discuss obstacles and strategies, to align messaging across countries and institutions. Is this conspiracy, or is it simply how elite governance works in a complex world? The answer depends partly on your political perspective. If you support globalization, European integration, free market economics, and limited government intervention, then Bilderberg looks like a useful coordinating mechanism for like-minded leaders. If you're skeptical of these policies, if you believe they've contributed to inequality, deindustrialization, and the erosion of democracy, then Bilderberg looks like a shadowy cabal working against the interests of ordinary people. Some specific policy outcomes have been credibly linked to Bilderberg discussions, though cause and effect are difficult to prove definitively. The creation of the European Union and the euro currency were discussed at Bilderberg meetings years before they were publicly proposed. The decision to pursue closer economic integration, despite public skepticism in several countries, aligns with positions consistently advocated at Bilderberg. Whether the meetings were where these policies were actually decided, or simply where elite consensus was formed and strengthened, remains debatable. The 2008 financial crisis and the subsequent bailouts of major financial institutions raised new questions about Bilderberg's role. Many of the people who made decisions about how to respond to the crisis, both government officials and financial industry executives, had attended Bilderberg meetings. The response prioritized protecting large financial institutions over helping ordinary citizens who had lost homes and savings. Was this because Bilderberg meetings had built relationships and shared perspectives among the elite that led them to protect their own? Or would the same decisions have been made regardless? What makes Bilderberg particularly frustrating for those seeking to understand it is the impossibility of proving what happens there. Without recordings, without detailed minutes, without statements from participants about specific discussions, we're left inferring from patterns and circumstantial evidence. We know these people meet, we know they discuss important topics, we know they have immense power in their official roles, but we don't know what they actually say to each other, or what agreements, even informal ones, they reach. Some journalists and researchers who have investigated Bilderberg over the years conclude that the truth is mundane. These are networking sessions where elites build relationships, test ideas, and yes, coordinate to some degree, but not in ways dramatically different from what happens at other elite gatherings like Davos or the annual meetings of the International Monetary Fund. The secrecy is about comfort, not conspiracy, allowing participants to speak freely without worrying about misquotation or public backlash.
Others conclude that Bilderberg represents something more significant, a conscious effort by Western elites to maintain their position and advance their interests through coordination that bypasses democratic processes. From this perspective, the secrecy is essential precisely because public knowledge of what is discussed and decided would generate political opposition that might prevent implementation. The COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent policy responses added fuel to Bilderberg theories. The conference was cancelled in 2020 due to pandemic restrictions, but resumed in 2021. Critics noted that many of the policies implemented during the pandemic, vaccine passports, increased digital surveillance, massive monetary interventions, aligned with themes regularly discussed at Bilderberg. Was this coincidence, or did the pandemic provide an opportunity to implement long-discussed policies that would have faced resistance under normal circumstances? Bilderberg defenders point out that correlation does not prove causation, that similar policies were implemented in countries without significant Bilderberg representation, that responding to a global pandemic naturally requires international coordination. They argue that seeing Bilderberg's hand behind every major policy development reflects paranoid thinking rather than clear analysis. Yet the questions persist. When democracy is supposed to mean that the people decide through elected representatives acting in public view,
What happens to democratic accountability when decisions are actually made, or at least heavily influenced, by private meetings of elites who refuse to disclose what they discussed? Even if Bilderberg makes no formal decisions, if participants reach informal consensus that they then pursue through their official positions, the effect on democracy is the same. The people who attend Bilderberg meetings already have extraordinary power. They don't need a secret organization to be influential. But Bilderberg provides something that raw power alone cannot: coordination, shared perspective, and the relationships that allow for cooperation across what would otherwise be competitive or adversarial boundaries. A central banker and a media executive might normally have little reason to coordinate. But if they've spent 3 days at a Bilderberg meeting discussing global challenges, if they've come to see issues from similar perspectives, if they've developed personal relationships, they're more likely to work together, even unconsciously, to advance shared goals. This is the subtle power of organizations like Bilderberg. They don't need to issue orders or pass resolutions. They simply need to bring the right people together regularly enough that those people begin to see themselves as a cohesive group with shared interests. Once that happens, coordination becomes natural, almost automatic. The participants aren't following orders from some hidden authority. They're acting on their own initiative in ways that align with the consensus of their peer group, the other members of the elite they've come to know and respect through repeated interactions at places like Bilderberg. The future of Bilderberg is uncertain. Growing populism and skepticism of elites, both from the political left and right, means the group faces more scrutiny than ever before. The internet makes it harder to keep meetings truly private. Photos and videos circulate even from secured perimeters. Younger generations are less deferential to established institutions and more willing to demand transparency. Bilderberg could adapt by becoming more open, providing more detailed information about its discussions while maintaining the off-the-record format that participants value. Or it could continue as it has, confident that its participants are too powerful to need public approval, that critics can be dismissed as conspiracy theorists, and that the value of the meetings to those attending is worth whatever reputational cost the secrecy incurs. What seems clear is that Bilderberg, or something like it, will continue to exist in some form. Elites have always gathered privately to discuss their shared interests. They always will. The specific institution of Bilderberg might fade, but the function it serves, bringing together the powerful to coordinate and build consensus away from public view, is unlikely to disappear. For those outside the meetings, the task remains what it has always been: to observe the patterns, to note who attends and what policies follow, to demand as much transparency as possible, and to remember that democracy dies not in a single coup, but in 1,000 private meetings where the powerful decide what the rest of us will live with. The Hotel de Bilderberg no longer hosts the annual meetings, but somewhere, every spring, about 150 of the most powerful people in the Western world gather behind closed doors for 3 days of discussion that will never be fully disclosed. And the rest of us must simply trust that they have our best interests at heart.
6. Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the pursuit of hidden knowledge. In the late 19th century, as Victorian England industrialized and rationalized, as science seemed to be explaining away the last mysteries of the universe, a group of people looked at the modern world and decided something essential had been lost. They believed that ancient wisdom, secret knowledge about the nature of reality and the human soul, had been hidden or forgotten, and they set out to recover it. Their organization would become one of the most influential occult societies in history, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn was founded in 1887, though its origins are shrouded in the kind of deliberate mystery that occult organizations love to cultivate. The official founding myth involves three men: William Wynne Westcott, a coroner and Freemason; Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, a struggling writer with an obsession for ancient magic; and William Robert Woodman, another Freemason and Kabbalist. According to the story these men told, Westcott obtained a manuscript written in cipher, along with a letter from a German adept named Anna Sprengel, who authorized them to establish an English branch of an ancient magical order. This origin story is almost certainly false. Most researchers now believe Westcott forged or fabricated both the cipher manuscript and the letter from Sprengel. The German lodge these men claim to be connected to probably never existed. But the lie, if it was a lie, served an important purpose. It gave the Golden Dawn the appearance of ancient legitimacy, a connection to unbroken traditions of magical practice stretching back through the centuries. What the Golden Dawn actually represented was an ambitious synthesis of Western esoteric traditions. The founders drew on Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition that maps the nature of God and creation through a diagram called the Tree of Life. They incorporated Hermeticism, the supposedly ancient Egyptian wisdom attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. They borrowed from ceremonial magic, astrology, alchemy, tarot, and the symbolism of Freemasonry. They studied the work of Renaissance magicians like Cornelius Agrippa and John Dee, and they created from all these sources a coherent system of magical practice that could be taught progressively through a series of initiations and degrees. The Golden Dawn divided its teachings into three orders. The first order covered the basics of magical theory and practice, divided into 5 subdegrees corresponding to the elements: earth, air, water, fire, and spirit. The second order, known as the Rose-Cross Order, was where serious magical work began, where initiates learned to perform complex ceremonies and to contact what the order called secret chiefs, non-physical beings who supposedly guided the order's work. The third order was purely theoretical, representing a level of spiritual advancement that might not be achievable in physical form. New initiates began at the lowest degree and progressed through examinations, memorizing vast amounts of material about correspondences between colors, numbers, Hebrew letters, astrological signs, mythological figures, and much more. They learned to perform ritual magic, elaborate ceremonies involving robes, wands, daggers, and cups, reciting invocations in Hebrew and Enochian, drawing pentagrams and hexagrams in the air, attempting to invoke angelic beings or banish negative influences. To a modern observer, much of this seems theatrical to the point of absurdity. Grown adults dressed in robes, waving wooden wands, reciting made-up or barely understood ancient language, performing ceremonies that have no measurable physical effect. But for the practitioners, these rituals had profound meaning. They believed they were manipulating actual spiritual forces, that the symbols and gestures and words had real power, that through magical practice they could transform themselves and potentially influence reality itself. The Golden Dawn attracted an extraordinary membership for an organization that never had more than a few hundred members at its peak. W.B. Yeats, the Irish poet and later Nobel laureate, was deeply involved with the Golden Dawn, eventually rising to significant rank within the order. Aleister Crowley, who would become the most notorious occultist of the 20th century, was initiated in 1898, though his membership was brief and contentious. Arthur Machen, the horror writer whose story The Great God Pan influenced generations of weird fiction, was a member. So was Algernon Blackwood, another influential writer of supernatural fiction. The actress Florence Farr was a prominent member who helped manage one of the order's temples. Constance Wilde, wife of Oscar Wilde, joined, though Oscar himself apparently did not. Bram Stoker, author of Dracula, may have been involved, though evidence is inconclusive. What is clear is that the Golden Dawn, despite being small and obscure, attracted creative and intelligent people, individuals who might have been expected to dismiss ceremonial magic as nonsense, instead found something compelling in it. What made the Golden Dawn different from earlier magical traditions was its systematic approach and its psychological sophistication. The Order's teachings weren't just about casting spells or contacting spirits. They were about self-transformation, about understanding the hidden aspects of your own psyche, about integrating disparate parts of yourself into a coherent whole. The magical practices were intended to induce specific psychological states, to break through the normal consciousness and access deeper levels of mind. This psychological dimension would later influence the development of depth psychology. Carl Jung, though never a member of the Golden Dawn, was heavily influenced by similar ideas and corresponded with people familiar with Golden Dawn teachings. The concept of the unconscious, of archetypes, of individuation as a spiritual process all resonate with Golden Dawn magical theory, even if expressed in different language. The Order's teachings on the Kabbalah were particularly influential. The Tree of Life diagram, with its 10 spheres or sephirot connected by 22 paths, became a central organizing structure for understanding reality. Each sephiroth represented a different aspect of divine emanation and human consciousness. By meditating on these spheres, by traveling in visualization up and down the Tree of Life, practitioners claimed to experience different levels of reality and different aspects of their own being. But the Golden Dawn, like many idealistic organizations, was plagued by internal conflicts. The central problem was authority. Who actually ran the Order? Were there really secret chiefs guiding its work from spiritual planes, as Mathers claimed, or was Mathers simply consolidating power by claiming to channel messages from non-physical authorities that conveniently supported his positions? The conflict came to a head around the turn of the century. Mathers, who had moved to Paris and was living in near poverty while claiming grand titles and authority, attempted to expel various members who questioned his leadership. Florence Farr led a rebellion against Mathers, taking control of the main London temple. Aleister Crowley, who had been sponsored by Mathers, attempted to seize the temple on Mathers' behalf, leading to a bizarre incident where Crowley, dressed in Highland regalia and claiming magical powers, was physically ejected by Yeats and other senior members. The Order splintered. Multiple groups claimed to be the true continuation of the Golden Dawn. Mathers maintained his own branch in Paris until his death in 1918. A.E. Waite, a mystic writer, formed the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, emphasizing Christian mysticism over magical practice. R.W. Felkin established the Stella Matutina, which continued Golden Dawn practices in a more conservative form. And Aleister Crowley went his own way entirely, creating new systems of magic that both built upon and rejected Golden Dawn teachings. The influence of the Golden Dawn extends far beyond its actual membership or lifespan as a functioning organization. Modern Wicca, ceremonial magic, and much of contemporary paganism draws heavily on Golden Dawn symbolism and practice. The Rider-Waite Tarot deck, the most popular and influential tarot design, was created by A.E. Waite and illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith, both Golden Dawn members, and is saturated with Golden Dawn symbolism. Anyone who has used or seen tarot cards has encountered Golden Dawn ideas, usually without knowing it. The Order's emphasis on personal spiritual experience rather than blind faith influenced broader religious trends. Its synthesis of multiple traditions into a coherent system became a model for later spiritual movements. and its treatment of magic as psychological transformation rather than simply supernatural power helped make occult practices intellectually respectable for educated people who couldn't accept crude superstition but were drawn to the transformative promise of esoteric practice. Aleister Crowley deserves special mention as the Golden Dawn's most notorious product. His time in the order was brief, from 1998 to 1900, but it provided him with the foundation for his later magical work. Crowley was brilliant, egotistical, and deliberately transgressive. He rejected Christian morality, experimented with drugs, engaged in sexual magic, and proclaimed himself a prophet of a new age. His magical system, called Thelema, grew directly from Golden Dawn teachings, but pushed them in directions that horrified his former colleagues. Crowley's motto, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," is often misunderstood as advocating selfishness or hedonism. Crowley meant something more specific. Discover your true will, your essential purpose, and then pursue it without compromise. This was actually continuous with Golden Dawn ideas about discovering your higher self and aligning your life with your spiritual purpose. But Crowley's personal lifestyle, his drug use, his sexual exploits, his deliberate provocations of conventional morality made it easy to miss the philosophical substance beneath the scandalous surface. Crowley's influence on popular culture has been profound. He appears, directly or indirectly, in countless works of fiction. His face is on the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album cover. Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page was a Crowley devotee who purchased and lived in Crowley's former home, Boleskine House. Occult themes in rock music often trace back to Crowley's ideas. He represents, for better or worse, the archetype of the transgressive magician, the person who refuses conventional limits in pursuit of spiritual truth or power. The Golden Dawn's teachings about magic were complex, distinguishing between different types of magical work. There was theurgy, magic aimed at spiritual ascent and union with the divine. There was practical magic, using ritual to influence external events or conditions. There was divination, accessing hidden knowledge through tarot, astrology, or other methods. And there was alchemy, understood both literally as transformation of substances and symbolically as transformation of the self. The order maintained that magic was a science, that it operated according to natural laws that could be studied and applied systematically. This was not about supernatural intervention from gods or demons, though those entities might be understood as real in their own way. It was about learning to use forces and faculties that exist in nature but are ignored or unrecognized by mainstream science and religion. Whether magic, as the Golden Dawn understood it, actually works is a question that admits no simple answer. Practitioners report profound experiences, psychological transformations, and occasionally events that seem to defy normal explanation. Skeptics point out that these experiences and events can be explained through psychology, coincidence, and selective memory. The rituals produce altered states of consciousness, certainly, but whether those states represent contact with objective spiritual realities or purely subjective psychological experiences remains contested. What cannot be disputed is that Golden Dawn practices had significant effects on those who engaged with them seriously. Whether through magical influence or psychological mechanism, people changed through their involvement with the order. They discovered aspects of themselves they hadn't known. They developed discipline and focus. They connected with symbol systems that gave them new ways to understand their experiences. The rituals, whatever else they did, served as technology for transforming consciousness. The gendered aspects of Golden Dawn teaching are complex. The order admitted women on relatively equal terms, unusual for late Victorian Britain. Women could advance through the degrees and hold positions of authority. Florence Farr ran a major temple. Mina Mathers, wife of MacGregor Mathers, was a talented ritualist and artist who created much of the order's visual symbolism. But the magical theory often treated masculine and feminine as complementary opposites, with masculine associated with active, solar, logical principles, and feminine with passive, lunar, intuitive ones. This gendered symbolism, while allowing for individual variation, reinforced broader Victorian gender essentialist ideas, even as the order's practice offered women unusual opportunities.
The political implications of Golden Dawn teachings are ambiguous. On one hand, the order attracted people dissatisfied with conventional religion and social structures, creative individuals looking for alternatives to Victorian repression. It offered a vision of spiritual development outside church control, of power available to individuals rather than mediated through institutions. This was potentially radical, democratizing access to spiritual experience. On the other hand, the order was hierarchical, elitist, and explicitly reserved its higher teachings for those deemed ready. The emphasis on hidden knowledge accessible only to initiates replicated the social stratification the members might have thought they were escaping. And some members brought disturbing politics to their occult practice. Yeats flirted with fascist ideas in his later years. Crowley's writings contain elements that can be read as supporting authoritarianism. The connection between occultism and far-right politics that would become more obvious in the 20th century had roots in organizations like the Golden Dawn. The order's teachings about races and human origins, drawn partly from theosophy, included concepts that strike modern readers as racist or pseudo-scientific. There were elaborate theories about root races evolving over vast time periods, about Atlantis and Lemuria, about esoteric differences between peoples. These ideas were common in late 19th century occultism and have been thoroughly debunked, but they represented the racial assumptions of the order's time and culture. Despite its flaws and eventual fragmentation, the Golden Dawn represented something significant, a serious attempt by educated people to systematize and practice magic in a modern context. It rejected the atheistic materialism that was becoming dominant in educated circles, but also rejected the dogmatic religion that seemed increasingly out of touch with modern thought. It sought a middle path, a way to be spiritual without being credulous, to practice ritual without abandoning reason, to pursue transcendence while remaining grounded in this world. The various successor organizations that claim Golden Dawn lineage continue to practice its rituals and teach its system. Some are serious organizations maintaining authentic magical traditions. Others are essentially cosplay, people who like dressing in robes and feeling connected to an ancient tradition without necessarily understanding or practicing the actual teachings. And some are commercial operations, selling initiations and degrees to anyone willing to pay without requiring the years of study and practice that the original order demanded. The original Golden Dawn temples are gone. The manuscript teachings have been published, the secret rituals disclosed, the symbols explained in books available to anyone. In one sense, this represents the total defeat of the order's attempt to maintain secret wisdom. In another sense, it represents the order's ultimate success. Its teachings have been preserved and made available to anyone seeking them. Whether those teachings point to genuine spiritual truths or elaborate self-deception remains, as with all esoteric claims, a matter of personal belief and experience. What is clear is that the Golden Dawn, in its brief existence, created a magical system that has influenced Western occultism for over a century, that continues to attract seekers and practitioners, and that represents a distinctly modern attempt to recover and practice what its founders believed was ancient wisdom. The secret chiefs, those mysterious entities that MacGregor Mathers claimed directed the order from spiritual planes, have never made an undisputed appearance. But perhaps they didn't need to. The Golden Dawn's true magic was not in summoning angels or casting spells. It was in creating a system that gave people tools for exploring consciousness, for interpreting their experiences through rich symbolic frameworks, for pursuing transformation through disciplined practice. Whether that constitutes magic or simply sophisticated psychology matters less than the fact that for many people, it worked. 7. Thule Society, from occult lodge to Nazi ideology. In Munich, Bavaria, in August of 1918, as the First World War entered its final months and the German Empire teetered on the edge of collapse, a group calling itself the Thule Society held its first meeting. The name referred to Ultima Thule, a legendary land in the far north mentioned in classical literature, supposed homeland of the Aryan race according to the racial theories then popular in German nationalist circles. This society, ostensibly focused on Germanic folklore and occult research, would within a few years become an incubator for the ideology and personnel of the Nazi Party. The Thule Society was founded by Rudolf von Sebodendorf, a German occultist whose real name was Adam Alfred Rudolf Glauer. Sebodendorf had spent years in Turkey, where he claimed to have been initiated into mystical teachings. Upon returning to Germany, he obtained leadership of a Germanic occult order and transformed it into the Thule Society. The organization combined several elements: Germanic paganism, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, belief in Aryan racial superiority, occult practices, and violent opposition to communism. Membership was restricted to those who could prove Aryan ancestry, specifically the lack of Jewish or other non-Aryan blood. This racist criterion was not unusual in German nationalist organizations of the period, but in Thule it was connected to elaborate occult theories about racial spiritual qualities. Aryans were believed to be descendants of a superior race that had once ruled from Hyperborea or Atlantis, possessing spiritual powers that had been degraded through mixing with inferior races. The Thule Society saw itself as working to recover and restore Aryan spiritual supremacy. The society's symbol was a long dagger overlaid on a swastika, the ancient sun symbol that Thule and other German occultist groups had adopted as representing Aryan racial heritage. This was not yet the Nazi swastika, but it was moving in that direction. The appropriation of the swastika, turning an ancient symbol used by multiple cultures into a marker of Aryan identity and German nationalism, was happening in various right-wing and occultist groups in Germany during this period. The Thule Society's meetings involved occult rituals and lectures on topics like runes, Germanic mythology, Atlantis, and the supposed Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy threatening Germany. But Thule was not just about spiritual speculation. From the beginning, it was politically active and violent. As Germany descended into chaos in late 1918 and early 1919, with communist uprisings threatening to turn Bavaria into a Soviet republic, Thule members organized armed resistance. When the Bavarian Soviet Republic was briefly established in Munich in April 1919, Thule members fought against it, some joining the Free Corps, the paramilitary units of demobilized soldiers who operated with extreme brutality. Several Thule members were executed by communist forces during this period, making them martyrs for the right-wing cause. The society contributed to the violent suppression of the communist movement and helped establish Munich as a center of radical right-wing politics.
It was in this context that the connection between Thule and the early Nazi Party emerged. The Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, or German Workers' Party, the organization that would become the Nazi Party, was created in January 1919 by Anton Drexler, a Thule member. The party's initial meetings were held in Thule Society premises. Early Nazi meetings and those of Thule overlapped in membership and location. Adolf Hitler joined the German Workers' Party in September 1919, assigned to infiltrate it by military intelligence, but stay in and eventually taking it over. Whether Hitler was ever a formal Thule member remains disputed. Some sources claim he attended meetings, others say he was never initiated. What is clear is that he had extensive contact with Thule members, was exposed to their ideas, and eventually absorbed much of their ideology into his own racial nationalism. The relationship between Hitler and Thule became complicated as his power grew. Several early Nazi leaders had clear Thule connections. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, was a member. Dietrich Eckart, one of Hitler's early mentors and a major influence on his ideology, was deeply involved with Thule. Alfred Rosenberg, chief Nazi ideologue, moved in Thule circles. These men brought Thule's racial theories, its occult-tinged nationalism, and its violent anti-communism into the Nazi movement. But as Hitler consolidated control, he became suspicious of occultism and of secret societies generally.
He saw them as potential rivals, alternative sources of authority and loyalty that might challenge his personal dominance. By the mid-1920s, Thule's influence was declining. Subottendorf left Germany. The society became less active. And while its ideas had been absorbed into Nazism, the organization itself became irrelevant. This raises a crucial question. To what extent was Nazism an occult movement? The answer is complex. Nazi ideology incorporated elements that came from occult sources, particularly racial theories about Aryan origins and spiritual superiority. Some Nazis, like Hess, and to some extent Himmler, remained interested in occult topics. The SS under Himmler engaged in pseudo-archaeological expeditions looking for Aryan origins and collected occult artifacts. But Hitler himself was not an occultist in any serious sense. He used whatever ideas were politically useful, including some that had come from occult circles, but he had no patience for mystical speculation that didn't serve immediate political purposes. The notion that Nazis were devil worshippers or that Nazism was primarily an occult conspiracy is not supported by serious historical research. Nazism was a political movement with definable economic interests and clear power dynamics, and reducing it to occultism obscures rather than illuminates its actual nature. That said, the connection between Thule and early Nazism matters because it shows how esoteric ideas about race and spirituality could merge with violent political extremism. The occult veneer made racist theories seem profound rather than merely hateful. By connecting Aryan superiority to ancient wisdom, to lost civilizations, to cosmic spiritual struggles, Thule and similar groups gave their followers a sense of participating in something larger than conventional politics. They were not just fighting for German interests, they were agents of racial destiny, warriors in an eternal conflict between Aryan light and Jewish communist darkness. The Thule Society's ideology was explicitly anti-Semitic in ways that drew on both traditional Christian anti-Judaism and newer racial biological theories. Jews were portrayed as a race fundamentally opposed to Aryans, as parasitic, as conspiring to undermine and destroy German national life. This anti-Semitism was not incidental to Thule's occult teachings, it was central. The mystical Aryanism was defined in opposition to Jews, creating a cosmic racial dualism that justified any violence against the Jewish population. After the Nazis took power in 1933, occult organizations, including Thule's various successors, faced a paradox. Their ideas had helped inspire Nazism, but the Nazi state banned secret societies, viewing them as potential threats. Many occultists believed they would be honored in the Third Reich for their role in developing Nazi ideology. Instead, they were often persecuted, their organizations dissolved, their literature confiscated. Subottendorf, the founder of Thule, tried to cash in on his organization's historical importance by publishing a book in 1933 connecting Thule to the Nazi movement. The book was immediately banned, and Subottendorf was forced to leave Germany. He died in Turkey in 1945, possibly by suicide, a forgotten man whose organization had helped birth the movement that ultimately rejected him. The occult elements that survived it within Nazism were those that could be stripped of mystical content and turned into practical tools for indoctrination and control. The elaborate symbolism, the use of ritual and pageantry, the creation of a mythological narrative about German destiny, these elements owed something to occult practices, but they served political rather than spiritual purposes. The Nuremberg rallies, with their torch-lit processions and sacred flames, borrowed from occult ritual but in service of state power rather than individual spiritual development. Heinrich Himmler's SS became the primary location for occult-influenced thinking within the Nazi state. Himmler established a research organization, the Ahnenerbe, to investigate Germanic prehistory, Aryan origins and various occult topics. SS officers were encouraged to see themselves as a racial, spiritual elite, modern incarnations of the ancient Germanic warrior priests. Wewelsburg Castle was developed as a centre for SS mystical practices, with a crypt intended to hold the remains of fallen SS leaders in a kind of Germanic Valhalla. But even within the SS, practical concerns usually trumped mystical ones. The occult trappings served to motivate and bond SS members, to make them feel part of an elite order with ancient roots.
The actual genocidal policies of the SS were planned and executed with bureaucratic rationality, not mystical fervor. The Holocaust was not an occult ritual, it was industrialized murder, organized by people who may have believed they were fulfilling racial destiny, but who implemented it through thoroughly modern methods of administration and technology. The tendency to emphasize occult influences on Nazism has been criticized for obscuring the more mundane realities of fascism. It arises from specific economic and social conditions, it appeals to people's material anxieties and status concerns, and it's supported by identifiable class interests. Focusing too much on Thule and occult ideology can make Nazism seem like an aberration, a product of weird mystical thinking, rather than an extreme manifestation of political tendencies that exist in more moderate forms in many societies.
Nevertheless, the Thule Society's role in early Nazi history is documented. It provided meeting spaces, initial membership, and ideological foundations. It connected German nationalism to racial occultism in ways that influenced early Nazi thought. It demonstrated how esoteric ideas could be weaponized for political purposes, how mysticism about racial origins could justify genocidal policies. The lesson of Thule is uncomfortable. Serious engagement with occultism, with alternative spiritualities, with esoteric traditions, does not necessarily lead to enlightenment or benevolence. It can just as easily lead to violent extremism if combined with racist ideology and political radicalism. The search for ancient wisdom, for hidden knowledge, for spiritual truths beyond conventional religion can be perverted into justification for the most horrific acts. Modern occultists often try to distance themselves from this history, arguing that the Nazis perverted genuine esoteric teachings, that authentic occultism is about spiritual development and would never support genocide. This is partly true, but also too convenient. The occult traditions that Thule drew on really did contain racist elements, theories about root races and spiritual evolution that privileged European peoples. These ideas were not Nazi inventions, they were already present in theosophy and other 19th century occultism. The Thule Society's legacy is one of warning rather than instruction. It shows that the combination of nationalism, racial ideology, occult thinking, and political violence can produce catastrophic results. It demonstrates that secret societies are not inherently noble or enlightened, that secrecy can hide the most destructive intentions, that alternative spiritualities can serve authoritarian rather than liberating purposes. Today, the Thule Society is mostly forgotten outside of specialized historical studies, but its ideas persist in various forms, in neo-Nazi movements that still reference Aryan mysticism, in conspiracy theories that link Jews to occult practices, in white supremacist appropriations of pagan symbols. The work of detoxifying ancient symbols from their Nazi associations, of recovering pre-Nazi European spiritual traditions, of distinguishing genuine historical research from racist mythology, continues to challenge modern practitioners of occultism and paganism. The swastika, that ancient symbol the Thule Society helped transform into a marker of genocidal ideology, can perhaps never be fully recovered in Western contexts. Its meaning has been too thoroughly corrupted. The same fate threatens other symbols and ideas that Thule and the Nazis touched. This is part of their legacy. They poisoned symbols and ideas, making it difficult for future generations to engage with them without confronting their association with the worst atrocities in human history.
8. The Priory of Sion, the hoax that won't die.
In 1956, a series of documents began appearing in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, the French National Library. These documents, called the Dossiers Secrets, claim to tell the history of an ancient secret society called the Priory of Sion, the Priory of Sion. According to these documents, the priory had been founded in 1099 during the First Crusade and had been protecting a profound secret about Jesus Christ and his bloodline for nearly a millennium. The Grand Masters of this secret society had allegedly included Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, Victor Hugo, and Claude Debussy. It was an extraordinary claim. If true, it would rewrite Christian history, reveal a conspiracy at the heart of Western civilization, and explain centuries of hidden influence by an organization dedicated to protecting the descendants of Jesus himself. There was only one problem. It was completely fabricated. The Priory of Sion was the invention of Pierre Plantard, a French con artist with a history of petty fraud and delusions of grandeur. Along with accomplices, including Philippe de Cherizet, Plantard created the Dossiers Secrets, planted them in the National Library, and proceeded to leak information to journalists and researchers that would slowly build the mythology of the Priory into something that seemed credible. The story Plantard and his associates told was elaborate. They claimed that in the late 11th century, a secret order was founded to protect the bloodline of the Merovingian dynasty, the kings who had ruled France before the rise of Charlemagne. According to this mythology, the Merovingians were not simply French royalty, they were descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, who, according to this alternative history, had been married and had children before the crucifixion. This bloodline, the story went, had been protected through the centuries by the Priory of Sion, working sometimes in cooperation with and sometimes in opposition to the Knights Templar. When the Templars were suppressed in the 14th century, the Priory had continued in secret, recruiting some of the greatest minds in Western history to ensure the survival and eventual restoration of the sacred bloodline to power. The documents Plantard created included elaborate genealogies, lists of Grand Masters, accounts of the Priory's involvement in major historical events, and codes and ciphers that hinted at deeper mysteries. They referenced real historical events and people, mixing fact with complete fiction in ways designed to make the whole narrative seem plausible to anyone not doing careful verification. In 1967, a French writer named Gérard de Sède published a book called L'Or de Rennes, later republished as Le Trésor Maudit, the Accursed Treasure, which brought the Priory of Sion story to wider attention. The book was supposedly based on research, but much of its content came directly from Plantard's fabrications. It told the story of a 19th century priest named Berenguer Saunier, who had discovered something in the village church of Rennes-le-Château that had made him suddenly wealthy. According to the book, Saunier had found documents proving the existence of the Merovingian bloodline and had been paid by the Priory to keep silent. The real story of Saunier is more prosaic. He likely obtained his money through selling masses, a practice that was technically simoniacal but common among impoverished rural priests. But Plantard's version was far more exciting, and it resonated with people predisposed to believe in secret histories and hidden bloodlines. The mythology grew through the 1970s, with various writers adding to it. Then, in 1982, 3 British writers, Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln, published The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, a book that took the Priory of Sion mythology and developed it into a comprehensive alternative history of Christianity. The book was a surprise bestseller, introducing millions of readers to the idea that Jesus had been married to Mary Magdalene, that their descendants had become European royalty, and that a secret society had been protecting this truth for 2,000 years. The book presented itself as serious historical research, drawing on the Dossiers Secrets and other sources. What the authors either didn't know or chose to ignore was that their primary sources were fraudulent. They interviewed Plantard, who played his role perfectly, dropping hints about the Priory's secrets while maintaining an air of mystery. The combination of genuine historical research about the Knights Templar and the medieval church with complete fabrications about the Priory created a narrative that seemed to fit together, that appeared to solve historical mysteries and explain curious coincidences. The Catholic Church, of course, rejected these claims as baseless. Mainstream historians dismissed them as conspiracy theories. But the book found an enormous audience among people dissatisfied with traditional Christianity, looking for alternative spiritualities, or simply fascinated by the possibility that history's official version might be wrong. The mythology might have remained a curious footnote if not for Dan Brown. In 2003, Brown published The Da Vinci Code, a thriller that took the Priory of Sion mythology as its premise. The novel was extraordinarily successful, selling millions of copies and spawning a major film. While presented as fiction, the book began with a page claiming that the Priory of Sion was real and that certain historical descriptions in the book were accurate. This claim was false, but millions of readers believed it. The Da Vinci Code brought the Priory of Sion mythology to a global audience and embedded it in popular culture. Suddenly, everyone was discussing secret societies, the bloodline of Christ, Mary Magdalene's role in Christianity, and whether the church had been covering up the truth for centuries. The irony is that by the time the Da Vinci Code was published, Plantard's fraud had been publicly exposed. In the early 1990s, French authorities investigated Plantard in connection with a scandal involving French politician Roger Patrice Palat. During this investigation, Plantard admitted under oath that he had fabricated the Priory of Sion, that the dossiers secrets were forgeries, that the whole story was a hoax. His accomplice, de Cherizet, confirmed this, explaining in detail how they created the documents and planted them in the library. Yet the exposure of the fraud has done surprisingly little to diminish belief in the Priory of Sion. Believers argue that the confession was forced, that Plantard was covering up the real Priory to protect it, that the hoax was itself a red herring obscuring genuine secrets. This demonstrates an important truth about conspiracy theories. Once established, they become remarkably resistant to disproof. Any evidence against them can be reinterpreted as part of the conspiracy.
What was Plantard's actual motivation? He was a fantasist who had always harbored delusions of aristocratic lineage. He claimed to be descended from the Merovingian kings, though this was false. He seems to have genuinely believed, or at least wanted to believe, that he was special, that he had some claim to importance. Creating the Priory of Sion mythology allowed him to position himself as the heir to an ancient lineage, the protector of profound secrets, a figure of genuine historical importance rather than the failed minor fraudster he actually was. There are also hints that Plantard's motivations were political. In his youth, he had been associated with right-wing, even fascistic groups in France. Some researchers suggest that the Priory mythology was intended to establish legitimacy for an authoritarian restoration, with Plantard or someone he supported claiming divine right to rule through Merovingian descent. If so, the plan never came close to success. The Priory of Sion mythology draws power from several sources. First, it plays on anti-Catholic sentiment, suggesting that the Church has been lying about fundamental aspects of Christianity. Second, it appeals to romantic notions about secret societies guiding history from behind the scenes. Third, it incorporates genuine historical mysteries, the Knights Templars' suppression, the strange wealth of Saunière at Rennes-le-Château, unexplained elements in Renaissance art, and offers tidy explanations for them. Fourth, it touches on the status of women in Christianity by elevating Mary Magdalene from repentant prostitute to wife of Christ, appealing to feminist critiques of patriarchal religion. But none of this makes it true. The documentary evidence for Jesus being married doesn't exist. The supposed codes in Leonardo's paintings are the result of pareidolia, seeing patterns that aren't really there. The Knights Templar's connection to a Jesus bloodline is pure invention. The Merovingian dynasty's claim to special spiritual status is mythological, and the Priory of Sion as a continuous organization from 1099 to the present is proven fiction. Interestingly, after Plantard's fraud was exposed, some people tried to establish a real Priory of Sion, presumably reasoning that if the organization had such cultural cachet, why not make it actual? These groups have no historical continuity with any medieval organization and are essentially fan clubs for a mythology they know is invented. The broader lesson of the Priory of Sion is about the difficulty of killing a good story. Plantard's hoax succeeded because it told people something they wanted to believe, that history is more interesting than we know, that powerful secrets are being kept from us, that alternative spiritualities might be more authentic than mainstream religion, and that a code can be cracked that will reveal hidden truth. These desires are not inherently wrong. History is indeed more complex than popular narratives suggest. Powerful interests do sometimes keep secrets. Alternative spiritual perspectives can offer valuable critiques of mainstream religion, and hidden truths do occasionally come to light. The problem is when these legitimate impulses are satisfied by fabrications rather than genuine investigation. The Priory of Sion's hoax has probably done more harm than good. It has diverted energy and attention from actual historical mysteries to a fictional one. It has given ammunition to those who dismiss all alternative history as conspiracy theory. It has made serious researchers' jobs harder by polluting the conversation with nonsense. And it has trained a generation of people to accept dramatic historical revisionism based on minimal evidence. Yet it persists, referenced in novels, documentaries, and YouTube videos as if it were real, or at least plausibly real. Pierre Plantard died in 2000, probably satisfied that his fantasy had taken on a life of its own, that he had successfully written himself into history, even if the role he played was ultimately that of a hoaxer rather than a legitimate heir to ancient mysteries. The Priory of Sion stands as perhaps the most successful secret society hoax in history, more influential in its fictional form than most actual secret societies ever were. It demonstrates how powerful a good story can be, how difficult facts are to establish against a compelling narrative, and how our hunger for mystery and meaning can lead us to embrace fabrications that tell us what we want to hear.
9. The Freemasons, building bridges between worlds. We return now to the organization that has become synonymous with secret societies themselves, Freemasonry. While we touched on the Masons earlier in our exploration of the Illuminati, the full story of Freemasonry deserves its own examination, for it is arguably the most influential and enduring secret society in Western history. The origins of Freemasonry remain genuinely mysterious, obscured by centuries of legend and the organization's own myth-making. The Masons themselves trace their lineage back to the builders of Solomon's Temple, to medieval cathedral builders, to ancient mystery cults, even to the Garden of Eden. These origin stories are almost certainly mythological, but they tell us something important about how Masons understand themselves, as heirs to an ancient tradition of builders, both literal and metaphorical, who possess secret knowledge about creating order from chaos. The documented history of Freemasonry begins in the late 16th and early 17th centuries in Scotland and England, emerging from actual stonemasons' guilds that were transitioning from trade organizations into something more philosophical and symbolic. These guilds had always had secrets. the practical knowledge of geometry, architecture, and engineering that allowed master masons to build structures that seemed to defy gravity. Gothic cathedrals with their soaring arches and impossibly thin walls supporting enormous weight represented the cutting edge of medieval technology, and the men who could design and build them guarded their knowledge carefully. As stone construction became less central to the economy, and as architectural knowledge spread through published books rather than oral tradition, these masons' guilds began accepting speculative members, gentlemen who were not actual stonemasons, but who were interested in the philosophical and symbolic aspects of the craft. The transformation from operative masonry, actual building, to speculative masonry, symbolic spiritual building, happened gradually through the 16th and 17th centuries. The first Grand Lodge, the organizational structure that would define modern Freemasonry, was founded in London in 1717, uniting 4 existing lodges under common governance. This is the event most historians point to as the birth of Freemasonry as we know it today. The organization quickly spread throughout Britain and then to Europe and the American colonies, attracting members from the emerging middle class, minor nobility, professionals, and intellectuals. Freemasonry's appeal lay partly in its peculiar combination of elements. It offered ritual and symbolism, appealing to humans' need for ceremony and meaning. It provided a framework for moral and philosophical development, teaching virtue through allegory and symbol. It created bonds of brotherhood across class lines, with aristocrats and merchants meeting as equals within the lodge. And it operated with independence from both church and state, offering a space for free discussion of ideas that might be controversial or forbidden elsewhere. The core structure of Freemasonry involves 3 degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. Each degree is conferred through an elaborate ritual in which the candidate undergoes symbolic death and rebirth, learns new signs and passwords, and receives instruction in moral and philosophical truths. The rituals draw on the legend of Hiram Abiff, the architect of Solomon's Temple, who, according to Freemasonic tradition, was murdered by 3 fellow craft who wanted to learn the secrets of a master mason without earning them. This legend, almost certainly invented rather than historical, serves multiple purposes. It emphasizes the importance of earning knowledge through proper initiation rather than stealing it. It creates a narrative of sacrifice and resurrection that parallels Christian themes while remaining separate from specific Christian doctrine. And it provides rich symbolism about integrity, secrecy, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. Beyond the 3 basic degrees, various Masonic orders offer additional degrees and rituals. The Scottish Rite has 33 degrees. The York Rite offers a series of degrees culminating in the Knight Templar degree, explicitly connecting Freemasonry to the medieval warrior monks. These higher degrees are technically separate organizations that require Master Mason status for entry, but they're closely associated with Freemasonry and share its basic principles. The symbolism of Freemasonry is extensive and multi-layered. The square and compass, the most recognizable Masonic symbol, represents the tools of the stonemason's trade, but also moral principles. The square teaching uprightness and honesty. The compass teaching restraint and keeping desires within proper bounds. The letter G, often appearing between the square and compass, is variably interpreted as standing for God, geometry, or gnosis. Other symbols include the all-seeing eye, representing divine providence watching over humanity. The pyramid, or ziggurat, representing the hierarchical structure of reality and the soul's ascent toward enlightenment. The 2 pillars, based on the pillars Jachin and Boaz that stood at Solomon's Temple, representing strength and establishment, opposites in balance, and numerous other symbols drawn from architecture, geometry, astronomy, and ancient mystery traditions. This rich symbolic vocabulary allows Masons to engage in what they call the work, the process of spiritual and moral development through contemplation and application of these symbols to their lives. A Master Mason is expected to continue studying these symbols throughout his life, discovering deeper meanings and applications as he matures. Freemasonry's religious position is complex and has been a source of controversy since its founding. Masons are required to believe in a supreme being, referred to as the great architect of the universe, but the specific nature of this being is left to individual interpretation. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, anyone who believes in a single supreme God or divine principle can be a Mason. Atheists are explicitly excluded. This theistic universalism was radical in the 18th century and remains controversial. The Catholic Church has condemned Freemasonry repeatedly, most significantly in the papal bull In Omenente Apostolatus, issued by Pope Clement XII in 1738. The Church's objections include Freemasonry's secret oaths, its acceptance of non-Catholics as equals, and what the Church sees as relativism about religious truth. Many Catholics have been Freemasons despite the Church's prohibition, and the relationship between Catholicism and Freemasonry varies by country and period. In historically Protestant countries, Freemasonry has generally faced less religious opposition. But in Catholic countries, especially in Latin America and Southern Europe, anti-Masonic sentiment has remained strong, with Freemasonry often associated with secularism, liberalism, and anti-clericalism.
9. The Freemasons, building bridges between worlds. We return now to the organization that has become synonymous with secret societies themselves, Freemasonry. While we touched on the Masons earlier in our exploration of the Illuminati, the full story of Freemasonry deserves its own examination, for it is arguably the most influential and enduring secret society in Western history. The origins of Freemasonry remain genuinely mysterious, obscured by centuries of legend and the organization's own myth-making. The Masons themselves trace their lineage back to the builders of Solomon's Temple, to medieval cathedral builders, to ancient mystery cults, even to the Garden of Eden. These origin stories are almost certainly mythological, but they tell us something important about how Masons understand themselves as heirs to an ancient tradition of builders, both literal and metaphorical, who possess secret knowledge about creating order from chaos. The documented history of Freemasonry begins in the late 16th and early 17th centuries in Scotland and England, emerging from actual stonemasons' guilds that were transitioning from trade organizations into something more philosophical and symbolic. These guilds had always had secrets, the practical knowledge of geometry, architecture, and engineering that allowed master masons to build structures that seemed to defy gravity. Gothic cathedrals with their soaring arches and impossibly thin walls supporting enormous weight represented the cutting edge of medieval technology, and the men who could design and build them guarded their knowledge carefully. As stone construction became less central to the economy, and as architectural knowledge spread through published books rather than oral tradition, these masons' guilds began accepting speculative members, gentlemen who were not actual stonemasons, but who were interested in the philosophical and symbolic aspects of the craft. The transformation from operative masonry, actual building, to speculative masonry, symbolic spiritual building, happened gradually through the 16th and 17th centuries. The first Grand Lodge, the organizational structure that would define modern Freemasonry,
was founded in London in 1717, uniting 4 existing lodges under common governance. This is the event most historians point to as the birth of Freemasonry as we know it today. The organization quickly spread throughout Britain and then to Europe and the American colonies, attracting members from the emerging middle class, minor nobility, professionals, and intellectuals. Freemasonry's appeal lay partly in its peculiar combination of elements. It offered ritual and symbolism, appealing to humans' need for ceremony and meaning. It provided a framework for moral and philosophical development, teaching virtue through allegory and symbol. It created bonds of brotherhood across class lines, with aristocrats and merchants meeting as equals within the lodge. And it operated with independence from both church and state, offering a space for free discussion of ideas that might be controversial or forbidden elsewhere. The core structure of Freemasonry involves 3 degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. Each degree is conferred through an elaborate ritual in which the candidate undergoes symbolic death and rebirth, learns new signs and passwords, and receives instruction in moral and philosophical truths. The rituals draw on the legend of Hiram Abiff, the architect of Solomon's Temple, who, according to Freemasonic tradition, was murdered by 3 fellow craft who wanted to learn the secrets of a master mason without earning them. This legend, almost certainly invented rather than historical, serves multiple purposes. It emphasizes the importance of earning knowledge through proper initiation rather than stealing it. It creates a narrative of sacrifice and resurrection that parallels Christian themes while remaining separate from specific Christian doctrine. And it provides rich symbolism about integrity, secrecy, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. Beyond the 3 basic degrees, various Masonic orders offer additional degrees and rituals. The Scottish Rite has 33 degrees. The York Rite offers a series of degrees culminating in the Knight Templar degree, explicitly connecting Freemasonry to the medieval warrior monks. These higher degrees are technically separate organizations that require Master Mason status for entry, but they're closely associated with Freemasonry and share its basic principles. The symbolism of Freemasonry is extensive and multi-layered. The square and compass, the most recognizable Masonic symbol, represents the tools of the stonemason's trade, but also moral principles. The square teaching uprightness and honesty. The compass teaching restraint and keeping desires within proper bounds. The letter G, often appearing between the square and compass, is variably interpreted as standing for God, geometry, or gnosis. Other symbols include the all-seeing eye, representing divine providence watching over humanity. The pyramid, or ziggurat, representing the hierarchical structure of reality and the soul's ascent toward enlightenment. The 2 pillars, based on the pillars Jachin and Boaz that stood at Solomon's Temple, representing strength and establishment, opposites in balance. And numerous other symbols drawn from architecture, geometry, astronomy, and ancient mystery traditions. This rich symbolic vocabulary allows Masons to engage in what they call the work, the process of spiritual and moral development through contemplation and application of these symbols to their lives. A Master Mason is expected to continue studying these symbols throughout his life, discovering deeper meanings and applications as he matures. Freemasonry's religious position is complex and has been a source of controversy since its founding. Masons are required to believe in a supreme being, referred to as the great architect of the universe, but the specific nature of this being is left to individual interpretation. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, anyone who believes in a single supreme God or divine principle can be a Mason. Atheists are explicitly excluded. This theistic universalism was radical in the 18th century and remains controversial. The Catholic Church has condemned Freemasonry repeatedly, most significantly in the papal bull In Homenente Apostolatus, issued by Pope Clement XII in 1738. The Church's objections include Freemasonry's secret oaths, its acceptance of non-Catholics as equals, and what the Church sees as relativism about religious truth. Many Catholics have been Freemasons despite the Church's prohibition, and the relationship between Catholicism and Freemasonry varies by country and period. In historically Protestant countries, Freemasonry has generally faced less religious opposition. But in Catholic countries, especially in Latin America and Southern Europe, anti-Masonic sentiment has remained strong, with Freemasonry often associated with secularism, liberalism, and anti-clericalism.
Freemasonry's political role has been significant and controversial. Many of the American founding fathers were Masons: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Paul Revere, John Hancock. The principles of the American Revolution, liberty, equality, self-governance, align closely with Masonic ideals. The United States founding documents and symbols show possible Masonic influence, though the extent of this influence is debated. The eye on the Great Seal of the United States is sometimes interpreted as Masonic, though it was designed by non-Masons, and its symbolism predates Freemasonry's use of the all-seeing eye. In Europe, Freemasonry became associated with Enlightenment thinking, with opposition to absolutism and religious dogmatism. Many leaders of liberal and revolutionary movements were Masons. This association led to Masonry being persecuted by authoritarian regimes. The Nazis banned Freemasonry and imprisoned Masons. Franco's Spain suppressed Masonic lodges. Communist regimes treated Masonry as a bourgeois conspiracy and outlawed it. Even today, Freemasonry is banned in many countries, particularly in the Islamic world. This persecution stems from Freemasonry's core principles: individual liberty, rational inquiry, toleration of differing beliefs, and loyalty to brotherhood that transcends national and religious boundaries. These principles threaten any regime based on compulsory uniformity and absolute authority. Authoritarian rulers, whether fascist, communist, or theocratic, correctly identify Freemasonry as inherently opposed to their systems. The question of what Freemasons actually do in their secret meetings has fueled countless conspiracy theories. The reality is probably disappointing to those expecting sinister plots. Most lodge meetings involve business administration, ritual performance, and socializing. Lodges maintain buildings, manage finances, organize charity work, perform degree ceremonies for new members, and provide opportunities for members to gather and strengthen bonds. The rituals themselves, while secret in detail, are not particularly shocking. They involve symbolic drama, recitation of traditional texts, displays of signs and passwords that identify members to each other, and instruction in moral principles. A typical Master Mason raising ceremony might take an hour or two, involving multiple participants playing different roles, elaborate staging, and symbolic actions representing the candidate's transformation from fellow craft to Master Mason. Critics argue that even if the content of these meetings is benign, the secrecy itself is problematic. When judges, politicians, police chiefs, and business leaders belong to a secret organization that teaches them to favor fellow Masons, when they take oaths of loyalty to the Brotherhood, when they have means of recognizing each other that the public doesn't know about, the potential for corruption and cronyism is obvious. Masons respond that their oaths do not override their duties to family, country, or God, that they're explicitly taught not to favor Masons when it would be unjust, that the Brotherhood is about mutual aid and support, not conspiracy. They note that Masonry charity work is extensive and public, that lodges often serve as community centers, that the principles they teach, honesty, integrity, brotherly love, are beneficial to society.
The truth likely includes elements of both perspectives. Most Masons probably do take their obligations seriously and don't engage in corrupt practices. But the existence of a network of mutual obligation among powerful men creates opportunities for favoritism, even if unintentional. A judge who is a Mason might unconsciously give more credence to a Mason lawyer's arguments. A police chief might not investigate a fellow Mason as thoroughly. A businessman might prefer to hire or contract with Masons. These effects don't require conscious conspiracy, just human nature and the bonds created through shared ritual experience. The decline of Freemasonry in the West is worth noting. Membership has been falling steadily since the mid-20th century. Lodges close, unable to attract enough new members to remain viable. The average age of Masons in many jurisdictions is 60 or above. Young men seem less interested in joining fraternal organizations generally, and Freemasonry's elaborate rituals and lengthy degree progression can seem outdated in an era of instant gratification. Several factors contribute to this decline. Changing social structures mean that men have less free time for lodge meetings. The need for professional networking is served by other organizations and social media. The secretiveness that once attracted members now seems suspicious or unnecessary. Women's exclusion from mainstream Freemasonry looks increasingly anachronistic. And perhaps most fundamentally, the rationalist Enlightenment worldview that Freemasonry emerged from and promoted no longer has the cultural dominance it once did. Yet Freemasonry persists, adapting slowly to changing times. Some jurisdictions have liberalized rules about discussing Masonry publicly. Prince Hal Freemasonry, the historically African-American branch of Masonry, has gained wider recognition. Co-Masonry, admitting both men and women, exists as an alternative to mainstream male-only lodges. And in parts of the world outside the West, particularly in Latin America and parts of Asia, Freemasonry is actually growing. The legacy of Freemasonry extends far beyond its current membership. Its influence on Western political thought, its role in the American founding, and its contribution to the development of civil society independent from church and state, and its creation of models for fraternal organization that countless other groups have imitated, all ensure that Freemasonry remains historically significant. Whether Freemasonry is a benign fraternal organization teaching moral principles through elaborate symbolism, or a shadowy network of elite men coordinating to advance their mutual interests, depends largely on perspective and probably varies by lodge and jurisdiction. What is clear is that for nearly 3 centuries, Freemasonry has occupied a prominent place in Western society, attracting both admiration and suspicion, maintaining traditions that seem increasingly out of step with modernity, yet persisting through its appeal to fundamental human needs for ritual, meaning, brotherhood, and connection to something larger than the self. The Mason working his way through the degrees, memorizing ritual, learning symbols, taking on obligations to his brothers, may be engaging in spiritual development, or networking for professional advantage, or simply enjoying the camaraderie of an old-fashioned men's club. Most likely he's doing all of these things simultaneously, finding multiple meanings and benefits in an organization that has always contained multitudes, that has always been more complex than either its defenders or critics acknowledge.
10. The Architects of Tomorrow. As we near the end of our exploration of secret societies, one question remains. Are there new secret societies forming right now? In an age of transparency, surveillance, social media, and radical connectivity, can genuinely secret organizations still exist? And if so, what forms might they take? The answer is yes, but with important caveats. Traditional secret societies, with elaborate rituals, physical meetings, and formal hierarchies, face challenges in the modern world. It's difficult to gather regularly without leaving digital traces. Cell phone location data, security cameras, social media check-ins all make secret meetings increasingly difficult to maintain. The kind of absolute secrecy that the Golden Dawn or even mid-20th century Masons could maintain is probably impossible now. But other forms of secret or semi-secret influence are very much alive. The Bilderberg Group continues its annual meetings. Similar gatherings, the World Economic Forum at Davos, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, bring together global elites for discussions that are technically not secret, but are shielded from meaningful public scrutiny. These organizations operate in what might be called functional secrecy, where meetings are acknowledged but content is protected, where membership is known but influence is deniable. In the technology sector, new forms of elite coordination have emerged. Silicon Valley has its own networks, informal groups of founders, investors, and executives who shape the development of technologies that increasingly structure human life. These networks don't meet in temples or perform rituals, but they exercise influence that historical secret societies could only dream of. When a small group of technology executives decides what speech is allowed on major platforms, when they determine what information people see and don't see, when they design algorithms that shape behavior and opinion, they're engaging in a form of social engineering that far exceeds the capabilities of any 19th century occult order. The rationalist and effective altruism movements represent another form of influential network that operates with some characteristics of secret societies. These groups attract wealthy tech entrepreneurs and influential intellectuals, meet regularly at conferences and retreats, coordinate funding and strategy, and pursue specific visions of humanity's future. They're not secret. Their writings and meetings are often public, but the actual decision-making about how to allocate billions of dollars and how to influence policy happens in smaller circles, in private conversations that the public never sees. Cryptocurrency and blockchain communities have their own semi-secret networks. Early Bitcoin adopters, major investors in crypto projects, and developers of new blockchain systems form interconnected groups that meet at conferences, communicate through encrypted channels, and coordinate strategies for advancing their vision of decentralized finance and governance. These networks operate internationally, across traditional boundaries, united by shared technological and philosophical commitments. Artificial intelligence research presents perhaps the most concerning domain for potential new secret societies. A small number of organizations, mostly private companies, are developing technologies that could fundamentally transform human civilization. The decisions about how to develop AI, what goals to pursue, what safeguards to implement, are being made by limited groups with minimal public input or oversight. Whether by design or by default, an AI elite is forming, a network of researchers, executives, and funders who will determine the trajectory of humanity's relationship with machine intelligence. Conspiracies around groups like QAnon demonstrate how easily new forms of secret society mythology can be generated in the Internet age. QAnon believers imagine a secret war being waged behind the scenes, with cryptic messages from anonymous sources supposedly revealing hidden truths. While QAnon itself is almost certainly not based on genuine insider information, it shows the hunger for secret society narratives, the appeal of believing that hidden forces are shaping events, that special knowledge is available to those who look deeply enough. The structure of modern conspiracy theories often mimics secret society narratives. An elite group, usually wealthy and powerful, is believed to be coordinating secretly to advance some agenda, whether global government, population control, or maintenance of their own privilege. These theories rarely have evidence, but gain traction because they provide simple explanations for complex phenomena and give believers a sense of understanding that the broader public lacks. Some modern secret societies operate entirely online. Anonymous, the decentralized hacker collective, functions as a kind of digital secret society, with no formal structure but shared identity and coordinated actions. Members are truly anonymous to each other and to the public, communicating through encrypted channels, organizing operations through consensus, and pursuing goals ranging from political activism to pure chaos. Whether Anonymous qualifies as a secret society or simply a very loose affiliation of individuals using a common brand is debatable, but it demonstrates new forms of organizational forms enabled by digital technology. Intelligence agencies represent another form of modern secret organization, though government-sanctioned rather than independent. The CIA, MI6, Mossad, and similar organizations operate with official authority but maximum secrecy. Their budgets are often classified. Their operations are hidden. Their methods and capabilities are protected. And the people who work for them must maintain secrecy about their employment and activities. In some ways, intelligence agencies are the ultimate modern secret societies, combining state power.
The potential for AI-generated secret societies is intriguing and troubling. As artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated, could it coordinate human activity in ways that humans don't recognize? Could AI agents influence multiple people to take complementary actions, effectively organizing them into a secret society without their knowledge? Could distributed AI systems form their own networks of influence, pursuing goals that humans never explicitly programmed? These scenarios might sound like science fiction, but they represent genuine possibilities as AI capabilities advance. What all these modern forms share is reduced emphasis on ritual and tradition compared to historical secret societies. The Golden Dawn's elaborate ceremonies, Freemasonry's degree system, the Templars' religious vows, these elements seem less relevant to contemporary elites. Modern secret or semi-secret organizations focus on practical coordination, information sharing, and consensus building, rather than spiritual transformation or mystical knowledge. This shift reflects broader cultural changes. The Victorian occultists who founded the Golden Dawn believed that ritual could produce real psychological and spiritual effects, that symbols contained power, that initiation ceremonies transformed participants. Modern elites, shaped by scientific rationalism and pragmatic orientations, are more likely to view such practices as quaint at best, meaningless at worst. If they gather secretly, it's to discuss business and politics, not to perform ceremonies. Yet perhaps we're missing something by dismissing rituals so completely. The Silicon Valley executives who gather at Burning Man, engaging in temporary community building and artistic expression in the desert, might be creating their own form of ritual experience. The structure of venture capital networks with formal and informal mentorship, insider knowledge passed from successful entrepreneurs to promising newcomers, patterns of favors and obligations, resembles in some ways the structure of traditional secret societies, even if the participants wouldn't describe it in those terms. The fundamental question about modern secret societies, as with historical ones, is how much influence do they actually have? When powerful people gather privately and then pursue seemingly coordinated agendas, is this because they planned it together, or because people in similar positions with similar interests naturally reach similar conclusions? Conspiracy theorists assume the former. Defenders of these networks insist on the latter.
The truth, frustratingly, is probably that both processes happen simultaneously, sometimes consciously coordinated, sometimes emerging from shared perspective and mutual influence, and often impossible to distinguish from outside. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a test case. Various elite organizations, the World Economic Forum prominently, discussed using the pandemic as an opportunity for a great reset, reimagining capitalism, accelerating digital transformation, addressing climate change. Conspiracy theorists saw this as proof of a planned conspiracy, elites deliberately engineering or at least exploiting the pandemic to advance their agenda. Defenders argued that it was simply responsible leaders discussing how to respond to a genuine crisis. Both perspectives contain elements of truth. Yes, elite networks did coordinate responses to the pandemic, and yes, they saw it as an opportunity to advance policies they already favored. But this doesn't mean they created the pandemic or that their coordination was necessarily nefarious. The line between reasonable crisis response by competent leaders and conspiratorial manipulation by shadowy elites is often more a matter of framing than fundamental difference in actions. As we look to the future, certain trends seem clear. Physical secret societies with elaborate rituals and formal structures will continue declining in the West, though they may persist in modified forms and may grow in other parts of the world. Functional secrecy among elites, meetings and networks that are acknowledged but whose actual deliberations remain hidden, will continue and probably intensify. New forms of organization enabled by technology, encrypted communications, decentralized coordination, AI-mediated networks will emerge and may come to dominate. The human psychological needs that secret societies serve, the desire for belonging, for special knowledge, for meaningful ritual, for connection to traditions and purposes larger than the self, these will persist. New organizations will arise to meet these needs, even if they look nothing like historical secret societies. Whether these new forms will be forces for human flourishing or vectors for elite domination remains to be seen. What we can say with confidence is that secrecy and power will continue their ancient relationship. Those who wield significant power will continue to seek privacy for their deliberations, and those excluded from that power will continue to be suspicious of what happens behind closed doors. Secret societies, in whatever forms they take, will remain part of human civilization, simultaneously fascinating and concerning, attractive and repulsive, promising enlightenment while delivering, often enough, simply another way for the privileged to...
Conclusion. Lifting the veil. Fourth, the difficulty of separating fact from fantasy. The Priory of Sion was pure fiction, but millions believed it. The Illuminati existed briefly, but has been credited with causing everything from the French Revolution to the 9/11 attacks. Conspiracy theories about secret societies grow precisely because of the absence of information. When we don't know what happens behind closed doors, imagination fills the void. And imagination, once set loose, recognizes no limits. Fifth, the question of legitimacy and accountability. Organizations like Opus Dei or the Bilderberg Group wield real influence over education, policy, and culture. Yet they operate with minimal public scrutiny, maintaining that they're private associations with rights to privacy. This creates a tension at the heart of modern democracy. How do we hold power accountable when it operates through networks that refuse transparency? The societies we've examined serve different purposes and pursue different goals. Some, like the Golden Dawn or Freemasonry, focus primarily on members' spiritual and moral development. Others, like Opus Dei or Bilderberg, pursue influence over temporal affairs. Some, like the Knights Templar or Thule Society, combined religious mission with political and military power. And one, the Priory of Sion, never existed at all except as mythology.
But they all share certain characteristics. They all restrict membership, whether through formal initiation or informal selection. They all maintain some level of secrecy about their activities, whether absolute prohibition on disclosure or simply preference for privacy. They all claim to possess or pursue knowledge or influence not available to the general public. And they all create bonds among members that persist beyond the organization's formal activities. These characteristics make secret societies simultaneously appealing and threatening. The appeal is obvious: belonging to something select, having access to knowledge others don't, being part of a network that can open doors and provide support. The threat is equally obvious: when important decisions are made by groups operating in secret, when networks of mutual obligation exist among the powerful, when criteria for membership exclude most of humanity, the potential for injustice, corruption, and abuse is substantial. The defenders of secret societies argue that privacy is not the same as secrecy, that people have rights to associate freely, that organizations focused on spiritual development or intellectual exchange should not have to conduct their business in public. They note that many secret societies engage in charitable work, that they teach moral principles, that they provide community and purpose for members. They argue that conspiracy theories about world domination are absurd, that the reality is much more mundane, groups of like-minded people gathering for mutual benefit. The critics argue that power exercised without accountability is inherently suspect, that organizations claiming noble purposes while refusing to operate transparently invite suspicion, that networks of influence among elites undermine equality and democracy. They note that many secret societies have historically excluded women, racial minorities, and the working class, perpetuating broader patterns of discrimination. They argue that even if individual secret societies aren't conspiring to control the world, the cumulative effect of multiple elite networks coordinating in private achieves similar results. Both perspectives contain truth. The reality of secret societies is almost always more complex and less dramatic than either enthusiastic members or paranoid critics suggest. They are simultaneously more benign and more influential than their extremes portray. They are human institutions, containing the full range of human virtues and failings, capable of inspiring genuine good and enabling real harm. What should we make of secret societies in the 21st century? Several conclusions seem warranted. First, we should distinguish between different types of organizations rather than treating all secret societies as equivalent. A fraternal organization like the Freemasons, whatever its flaws, is fundamentally different from a gathering of political and business elites like Bilderberg. The former primarily affects its own members. The latter has potential to shape policy affecting millions. Both may be secretive, but the stakes are vastly different. Second, we should demand transparency from organizations whose members hold public power. If judges, legislators, and cabinet ministers belong to organizations that meet privately and refuse to disclose their discussions, the public has the right to know what those organizations are and to question whether these affiliations create conflicts of interest. Privacy for purely social or spiritual organizations is one thing. Secrecy for organizations whose members make decisions affecting all of us is another. Third, we should be skeptical of conspiracy theories while remaining alert to actual conspiracies. Not every secret society is plotting world domination. Most are not. But powerful people do sometimes coordinate secretly to advance their interests, and this coordination can have significant effects on society. The challenge is distinguishing between legitimate concerns about elite coordination and paranoid fantasies about all-powerful cabals.
Fourth, we should recognize that the desire for community, meaning, ritual, and purpose that draws people to secret societies reflects genuine human needs. If these needs are not met through healthy channels, they will be met through unhealthy ones. The decline of traditional institutions, including fraternal organizations like Freemasonry, may leave a vacuum that gets filled by extremist movements, conspiracy theory communities, or cult-like groups offering belonging and purpose to those who feel alienated from mainstream society. Fifth, we should understand that complete transparency is neither possible nor necessarily desirable. Some privacy is essential for honest discussion, for exploration of ideas without fear of immediate judgment, for building trust and relationships. The question is not whether private gatherings of powerful people should exist, they inevitably will, but rather how to ensure that the power exercised through these gatherings remains accountable to democratic processes and principles. The future of secret societies is uncertain. Traditional forms may continue fading in the West while persisting or growing in other regions. New forms may emerge, shaped by technology and changing social structures. The fundamental dynamics that create secret societies, the concentration of power, the desire for belonging, the appeal of hidden knowledge, seem likely to persist. What we can hope for is greater transparency where it matters most, in the exercise of public power, and greater tolerance for privacy where it matters least, in people's spiritual and social lives. We can demand that those who shape our world be accountable for their decisions, while respecting that not every gathering or conversation needs to be public. We can investigate claims about secret societies' influence without succumbing to paranoia that sees conspiracy behind every event. The societies we've explored tonight, from Skull and Bones to the Freemasons, from Bohemian Grove to the entirely fictional Priory of Sion, tell us something about ourselves. They reveal our hunger for meaning and mystery, our suspicion of concentrated power, our fascination with hidden knowledge, and our perpetual uncertainty about who really controls the forces shaping our lives. Some secret societies have been forces for good, promoting enlightenment values, fostering intellectual exchange, providing community and moral instruction. Others have been vehicles for elite privilege, spaces where the powerful coordinate to maintain their position. Most have been some combination, serving multiple purposes simultaneously, meaning different things to different members, presenting different faces to insiders and outsiders. The Knights Templars protecting pilgrims were heroes. The Templars as bankers accumulating vast wealth were something more ambiguous. The Masons promoting brotherly love and mutual aid represent fraternity's best impulses. The Masons as an old boys network perpetuating elite privilege represent its dangers. Opus Dei members seeking holiness through daily work are sincere believers. Opus Dei as a political force pursuing conservative Catholic influence over society is something that should concern anyone who values pluralism. These organizations are not monolithic. They contain multitudes. They are simultaneously what their defenders claim and what their critics fear. This is why they remain so endlessly fascinating and so perpetually controversial. As for the question of whether secret societies truly control the world, the answer is both no and yes. No, there is no single shadowy organization pulling all the strings, no Illuminati headquarters where the fate of nations is decided. The world is too complex, too chaotic, too subject to contingency and chance for any group to control it entirely. But yes, networks of powerful people meeting privately and coordinating their actions do shape outcomes in ways that affect all of us. These networks don't need to be formal organizations with membership rosters and initiation rituals to function effectively. Shared class interests, similar educational backgrounds, regular social interaction, and mutual obligation create coordination without conspiracy. The real question is not whether elites coordinate, they do,
but whether this coordination serves broader social interests or only their own, whether it operates with sufficient transparency to be accountable, and whether alternatives exist for those not part of these networks to exercise meaningful power. Secret societies, in all their forms, will remain part of human civilization. They reflect enduring aspects of human psychology and social organization. They will continue to attract the curious, the ambitious, and the powerful. They will continue to generate conspiracy theories and legitimate concerns. And they will continue to operate in the shadows, visible enough to be known, but obscure enough to remain mysterious. Perhaps that is how it should be. Complete transparency would eliminate the possibility of honest private discussion. Complete secrecy would eliminate accountability. The challenge is finding the balance, the level of openness that preserves both privacy and democracy, that allows for community and purpose while preventing abuse of power.
The veil will never be fully lifted. There will always be rooms we cannot enter, conversations we cannot hear, decisions made by people we did not elect. The question is whether we can live with this reality without succumbing to paranoia, whether we can demand accountability without requiring total transparency, whether we can distinguish between legitimate privacy and dangerous secrecy. The secret societies we've explored tonight offer no easy answers. They are symptoms of deeper questions about power, knowledge, community, and trust. They reveal our ambivalence about elites, our fascination with the hidden, our desire for both transparency and mystery. As you lie in the darkness tonight, perhaps you'll wonder about the meetings happening right now in places you cannot see. Perhaps you'll question whether the democratic processes you trust are real or theater, whether the people making decisions about your life are accountable to you or to networks you know nothing about. Perhaps you'll feel the pull of secret knowledge, the appeal of belonging to something select and powerful. Or perhaps you'll recognize that most of reality is neither as dramatic as conspiracy theories suggest, nor as transparent as official narratives claim. Perhaps you'll accept that uncertainty is part of the human condition, that we navigate a world where some things are hidden and always will be, where power operates partly in public and partly in the shadow, where the line between legitimate privacy and dangerous secrecy is blurry and contested. The societies we've discussed tonight, the real and the imagined, the historical and the contemporary, are mirrors reflecting our own preoccupations and fears. They show us what we believe about power, what we desire in terms of meaning and belonging, what we fear about the forces shaping our world. Whether you see them as noble orders pursuing spiritual enlightenment and human progress, or as sinister cabals coordinating to maintain elite dominance, or simply as groups of people gathering for complex and varied reasons, says as much about you as about them. The truth, as always, lies not in choosing one interpretation over another, but in holding multiple possibilities simultaneously, in recognizing that reality is more nuanced than any single narrative can capture, in maintaining both skepticism and openness, both critical thinking and the humility to admit that much remains unknown and perhaps unknowable. The secret societies continue their work, whatever that work may be. The tomb at Yale stands dark and silent. The redwoods of Bohemian Grove shelter another summer's gathering. Opus Dei members pursue holiness through their daily vocations. Bilderberg convenes its annual meeting. Freemasons continue their rituals in lodges around the world, and countless other organizations, acknowledged and secret, ancient and newly formed, pursue their various purposes in the spaces between public visibility and absolute secrecy. The societies we've discussed tonight, the real and the imagined, the historical and the contemporary, are mirrors reflecting our own preoccupations and fears. They show us what we believe about power, what we desire in terms of meaning and belonging, what we fear about the forces shaping our world. We are left with questions rather than answers, with patterns rather than proofs, with suspicions rather than certainties. And perhaps that is fitting. The mystery of secret societies is not meant to be completely solved. It is meant to remind us that much about our world remains hidden, that power operates in complex ways we can only partially see, that human institutions are always more complicated than they appear. As you return from this journey through hidden chambers and secret meetings, carry with you not paranoia or complacency, but informed awareness. Know that secret societies exist. Understand that they wield varying degrees of influence. Recognize that they serve multiple purposes and mean different things to different people. Question the narratives you encounter, both the official explanations and the conspiracy theories. Demand transparency where it matters most. Respect privacy where it does not threaten the common good. And remember that the most important secret society is the one that includes all of us, the human community, trying to navigate our shared existence, seeking meaning and purpose, pursuing power and resisting it, building institutions and tearing them down, forever creating mysteries we then spend centuries trying to solve. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of secret societies. If you found this journey into the shadows enlightening, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Close Whispers for more investigations into the hidden corners of our world. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you encountered any secret societies? Do you believe they wield the influence attributed to them? What mysteries would you like us to explore next? Until next time, sleep well if you can, knowing that somewhere, behind doors you'll never open, in rooms you'll never enter, people are gathering to discuss things you'll never hear about, making decisions that may shape your life in ways you'll never fully understand. The secrets remain, the societies endure, and the mystery continues. Sweet dreams.